Chapter 824. It wasn't that Duque was bragging, but he had been really close to Sylvanas. From the first year of the Dark Portal, when the Windrunner's eldest and second sisters had supported Southshore, to when the Windrunner family had been lured to Elven Forest, to when Karazhan had been blown up 5 years after the Dark Portal, Duque had seen her at least 800 times, if not 1,000. Later on, because he often fooled around with Aurelia and Winrisa, she seemed to hate him, and their meetings had gradually decreased. In his memory, every time they met, as long as Duque was in the house, Sylvanas would never walk through the front door. When had she not relied on her unimaginably high agility to jump in through the window? What was a notice? Could a notice be eaten? Obviously, Vanessa was also shocked. It could be heard from her tone of voice. Because Silvermoon City had been destroyed, plague and death were everywhere. Other than the rescue team, the Alliance had to board the ship again at Donna's Island, pass through the original Windrunner Tower in the southwest of Longsong Forest, and take the southern mountain road to the plague. Only a small number of logistics troops and Duque and other higher-ups were arranged outside the northwest gate of Silvermoon City. Duque also lived in a villa that originally belonged to the Silvermoon Council. Invite her in. Not long after Duque gave the order, he heard the sound of knight-errant boots coming from the corridor outside. Duque was a little stunned, and then he was stunned when he saw Sylvanas. Damn it. What was going on tonight? Why was she suddenly wearing formal dress for a banquet? Wasn't it the sound of boots just now? Windwalkers loved nature, and at the same time, they pursued high agility. If it wasn't for the magic armor that could increase their body's speed and agility, they might have chosen to wear bikinis on the battlefield. According to them, this way they could feel the flow of the wind better. So seeing the sexy and exquisite collarbones, the Windrunner cleavage, and the soft and bouncy waist, it was a blessing for Duque, and almost became the stereotype of the 4 Windrunner sisters in his mind. Suddenly seeing Sylvanas wearing formal clothes, Duque was not used to it. Although it was still very amazing. The black, low-cut fishtail skirt paired with a white blouse made her look both solemn and sexy. She seemed to have washed her hair in order to meet Duque, and her blonde hair was put up in a neat bun. The only thing that gave Duque a headache was that ladies usually wore low-cut dresses. In order to prevent their chests from looking too empty, they would wear a necklace with gemstones or something. What was the meaning of Sylvanas wearing a Dark Portal Warrior's badge as a necklace? After Vanessa opened the door for her, Sylvanas looked a little embarrassed. She stood in the doorway, dignified and impeccable, except that the fingers of her hands, which were neatly placed on her abdomen, were furtively pinching each other with the fingers of her right and left hands. Duque smiled awkwardly. I heard that time means nothing to the High Elves. If you could treat my room as your own like you did 10 years ago, perhaps you and I would be more comfortable. Then, should I go back and change my clothes now? Duque's face was full of embarrassment. Am I imagining things? Why does it feel like Queen Sylvanas's intelligence has dropped? Duque looked up at the darkening night outside the window. It's getting late. Come in. Just say what you want. Sylvanas walked in with her ladle-like little steps. It had to be said that in the past 10 years, Duque's invention of high heels had become popular throughout the Eastern Kingdom, earning a lot of money from ladies. It wasn't that this trend had not reached the closed Kuel Salis. It should be said that high heels were a rare case of human cultural invasion. At this moment, Duque looked at Sylvanas in ranger boots and evening dress and felt that it was a little out of place. What's wrong with me? The female ranger seemed to be extraordinarily sensitive. Taking care of her complicated emotions, Duque snapped his fingers. Vanessa, pick a pair of things from box 7. Not long after, the now mature maid elegantly presented a pair of black high heels inlaid with glittering glass ornaments. Sylvanas's face turned red. Because she only wanted to come back and fight, she didn't even bring a pair of shoes for the banquet. She had been preparing for battle the moment she returned to the forest. In the end, when she wanted to wear a formal dress, even this evening dress had to be borrowed by Lilith, and she couldn't find suitable shoes. She knew at a glance that the shoes would definitely suit her. She was a little angry. It was obvious that the shoes were for her sister, since all 3 sisters had the same size. Vanessa explained calmly, I didn't know when the two matriarchs would return, so I brought a lot of their things when I came to meet Master. But since you are sisters, I don't think you'll mind. Sylvanas glared. She wanted to say, I mind, but she didn't have the strength to do so. She wanted to change herself. It was indeed impolite to wear an evening dress with long boots, but she immediately gave up. Women's evening gowns in this era, be it elves or humans, all had a characteristic, and that was the insanely narrow waist. In order to accentuate a woman's slim waist, it was definitely enough to shift a woman's internal organs when it was tightened. Her waist was thin in the first place, but with Lilith's help, she couldn't even bend herself. She could only ask Vanessa to help her change into the high heels with a bitter smile. After Vanessa left, only Duque and the hot black tea that Vanessa had just served were left in the room. She took a sip and calmed herself down, but she didn't know where to start. As if her brain was cramping, she suddenly said, "The High Elves seem to want to make me their queen." She regretted it almost as soon as she said it. Oh my God! What am I saying? Am I showing off? Duque smiled. That's right. The elves are very lively. I can hear them from half the city ruins. But. Taking a deep breath, Sylvanas finally said loudly, "Do you have no opinion on this?" Even she didn't know why, but she seemed to care a lot about Duque's opinion. Duque smiled calmly and replied without malice, "Well, do you want me to congratulate you? Well, congratulations. Your passion and loyalty to the kingdom have finally won everyone's approval." The calmer Duque was, the more Sylvanas felt like he couldn't hold back his emotions. Not knowing what to say, she suddenly said, "Are you really capable of prophecy? I clearly remember that you accidentally called me Queen Sylvanas more than once." This time, Duque was stunned. Chapter 8:25. If a person wanted to lie, there were two kinds of people he could not hide it from. One was his enemy, who knew him better than he did, and the other was the people around him. From the end of the second battle of the Dark Portal until the second invasion of Nuzul, Duque had lived a happy life. When people were not under pressure, their nerves were not so tense, and they would not have too many scruples. Big secrets could be kept, but small secrets still had a chance to be leaked. Duque did not know how to talk in his sleep, but he had seen Sylvanas too many times, and he was used to calling her Queen Sylvanas before he crossed over, so he would always spill the beans. In the past, he could just laugh it off, but now there was Mediva's prediction of the invasion of the Scourge army, and Duque's ability to predict the future. Now, Queen Sylvanas suddenly asked one of Duque's Achilles' heel. There was no point in denying it. For a person with such amazing intuition, any disguise would be seen through in an instant. Duque flung his robe, revealing a sage-like appearance. He looked serious, and Sylvanas was stunned. It was 36 years ago, on a clear and cloudy night. The clock was at 13:61, and I suddenly heard a rumbling sound. It was the sound of the sky. Suddenly, a very pleasant neutral voice sounded in my ear, and it told me a shocking secret. That is, after 36 years, Sylvanas Windrunner will be crowned queen. Duque began to talk nonsense with a straight face, and at first he did frighten the queen. Although Queen Sylvanas's intelligence at the moment was a little touching, she immediately came to her senses. There were too many things to complain about. In this world, Duque's official announcement to the public was that he was only 19 years old before he disappeared. Now that he had eternal life and age had no meaning, the authorities believed that Duque was a 29-year-old guy who was about to step into the ranks of middle-aged uncles. Then 36 years ago, what the hell was that? 13:61 at night? The sound of the sky? Are you sure it wasn't me being struck by lightning? What secret? Sylvanas was furious. He subconsciously rushed over and grabbed Duque's collar. "Duque, you bastard! Enough. I'm asking you a serious question. How dare you brush me off?" But she soon realized that something was wrong. Her actions were too unladylike and too intimate. If they weren't very close, how could they grab each other's clothes so casually? She wanted to apologize on the spot, but the index finger of a mage's hand gently pressed against her red lips. A second later, Duque replaced the magic finger with his right index finger. Duque shook his head. You don't need to apologize. Don't you think this is the original you? I don't remember estranging you to this extent. But you and big sister and third sister disappeared for 10 years. I almost forgot about you. Moreover, I have also returned the territorial documents and the aristocratic badge. But you betrayed the Marcus family. In the field of politics, this could be said to be a very serious betrayal. In the human world, the allegiance of hereditary nobles was eternal. Unless the great lord voluntarily removed the title of nobles, or there was absolute evidence that the lord was dead and the next lord announced the removal of allegiance, this monarch and vassal relationship was permanent. In fact, even if the great lord released the person, such a removal would be regarded as a disgrace to the lower nobles. Strictly speaking, it was the right thing for the Marcus family to scold Servanas as a traitor and launch a crusade against her. Duque said slowly, "Betrayal? I don't remember Iluhia, who acted as a director for me, issuing a notice that you are a traitor to the family. I also don't think an elf who defends his country and hometown is a traitor to his country and people. It was me who abducted you and your sister by small means. You just did what you had to do." This was already a classic example of repaying evil with good. In that situation at the time, so what if he was the hero of Cule Salis? He slapped the Sun King and the Silver Moon Council in the face. So what if Big Sister proved that she was right? Wouldn't he still have to make things difficult for him later? He might even find a reason to torture him to death. At this moment, Servanas finally couldn't help but cry out. Unconsciously, she cried out and threw herself into Duque's arms, crying non-stop. "Bastard! Why are you so good to us sisters? Why are you so good to me after you have big sister and third sister? Bastard! 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 Did you foresee all this and then do it on purpose? You deliberately came to save me at the most critical moment and made me confused. You deliberately took the opportunity to make me a queen or something. Well, Queen Servanas, at least you got a lot of it right. How is it possible? I am not a god." Duque smiled bitterly. The original history of this world had been messed up by him. It seemed that Queen Servanas still became a queen, but she was no longer the forgotten Queen of Death. Who would have thought that after saving Servanas, she would still have such a queen's life? She couldn't be the queen of the Forsaken, but was determined to be the queen of the High Elves? In all honesty, I don't have the ability to persuade your old subordinates. I haven't even come into contact with them. Heroes were all terrifying existences with amazing intuition. Feeling that Duque wasn't lying, Queen Servanas seemed to feel a little better. She lowered her head and fell silent. However, when she raised her head a few seconds later, Duque was startled. It was because what appeared before him was a Servanas whose gaze was like lightning, his gaze sharp, and not the foolish girl from before who was in a complete mess. She took a deep breath. "Well, Duke Marcus, I have to admit that for the past 10 years, I have been looking for a partner stronger than you, to surpass big sister and third sister. This idea was wrong." Her eyes seemed to have a magical power that attracted Duque's gaze. "I refuse to admit my heart. This is the demon in my heart that prevented me from improving for more than 10 years. Well, I now announce that I, Servanas Windrunner, have fallen in love with you, Duque. Even if this may be a mistake, or the result of someone's calculation, my feelings at this moment tell me that I really have fallen in love with you." Queen Sylvie admitted it so openly and took the initiative to confess. Duke was surprised, but also made his heart beat wildly. Wait. Before you answer, I must ask you to answer my question seriously." Servanas suddenly rolled up her skirt, pulled out a dagger from the inside of her thigh, and pressed it against Duque's neck. "If you answer wrong, I will probably kill you on the spot, and then kill myself to accompany you." Servanas was so unyielding, and her momentum was so shocking that it directly frightened Duque. Chapter 8:26. Duque was a little surprised, and also had a headache. Sure enough, should he say that Queen Sylvanas deserved to be called Queen Sylvanas? Brave, rebellious, and full of wisdom. In history, Queen Sylvanas could protect her home and defend her country. She risked her life to stop Arthas in the Long Song Forest. In the end, she was killed because she could not defeat him. She was even turned into a banshee of death, and finally became the queen of the Forsaken. She could be crazy about what she was determined to do. On the other hand, she seemed to be very reserved when it came to feelings. He had known Sylvanas for 15 years, but Duque had never felt that she liked him. Although he was a bastard from time to time, he would accidentally show off their love and abuse a single dog like her, but heaven and earth could testify that Duke really did not have the intention to deliberately abuse her heart or seduce his sister-in-law. As for saving her, nonsense. If he really let her die in Cuel Salis, Aurelia and Sasha would come back and hate him for the rest of their lives. Who would have thought that after saving her, he would immediately kiss her with a heavenly thunder and earthly fire? In fact, at the moment in front of the sun-chasing king court, Duque was distracted. Damn, I have been through so much hardship to be reborn here, and I have worked so hard to be a hero. Do I still want to be a single dog for the rest of my life? I already have a pair of sisters, in for a penny, in for a pound, in for a pound, in for a pound. They are the famous 3 Windrunner sisters. Duque was ready to beat up the 3 sisters, but Queen Sylvanas' staunchness was a little unexpected. Duke took a deep breath, and with the mentality of resurrection, he ignored the dagger on his neck that was moving up and down along with the pulse of his neck. He replied seriously, "Ask me, and I will answer truthfully. Maybe the answer will not be what you think, but I promise this will be the answer from my heart." Sylvanas gently bit her lips and shifted her gaze away for a moment. She then immediately stared back at Duke. "Do you love my eldest sister and third sister?" Duque did not hesitate. "I heard from Lilith that they just can't come back to Azeroth for the time being. What will you do when they come back?" Women's words were often full of traps. At this time, Duque had no choice but to ignore these traps. "I will love them as always," Duque said resolutely. Almost instantly, Sylvanas' eyes that could speak were filled with tears. It was a pair of eyes that were about to cry. She bit down hard on her lips. She bit down so hard that blood started to seep out from her red lips. She took a few deep breaths, and her beautiful chest rose and fell. She said with a trembling voice, "Then do you like me? I mean the romantic kind." "I like it," Duque said decisively. Sylvanas was overjoyed at first, but immediately retracted his ecstasy with a little fear. His face turned cold, and he raised his long eyebrows that were unique to high elves. "Then what am I? What do you like about me? Do you like the fact that I have a similar figure as Big Sister? Or do you like the fact that I look like Third Sister? What are you doing? Like all 3 of us at the same time? Or do you like all high elves? Are you afraid that you will only be a substitute for the older or younger sisters?" Duque's words hit the nail on the head, immediately making Sylvanas' entire body tremble. Sylvanas couldn't help but tilt her head away, not daring to look into Duque's burning eyes. Duque gently used 2 fingers on his left hand to clamp the dagger's edge, moving the dagger away. He gently used his left hand to wrap around that elastic little waist, while his right hand hooked Sylvanas' chin, forcing her to look him in the eye again. Duque smiled. "That's Sylvanas who cares about our sisterhood. That's Sylvanas who shoots down enemies on the battlefield with her bow and arrow. That's Sylvanas who swings her long legs on the eaves of my house without any misgivings. That's Sylvanas who didn't hesitate to give up glory, splendor, wealth, and safety for the sake of her hometown. That's Sylvanas who are willing to sacrifice themselves to save their own kind, giving up their freedom. I like every Sylvanas so much." When Duque said this, Sylvanas' entire body seemed to have been hit by the petrifying spell of love. Her whole body was stiff and unable to move. Only her heavy breathing and intense heartbeat told her that she was still alive. "There was once a sincere love placed in front of me, but I didn't dare to confirm it. I didn't dare to ask, and in the end, I missed it. There is nothing more painful than this in the world. In the past 10 years, I have been secretly regretting it. If God can give me another chance, I will say 3 words to that girl: I love you. If I have to add a time limit to this love, I hope it is 10,000 years. The trick was not afraid of being old-fashioned, the key was that it was effective. The signature trick of Stephen Chow, which had been used by countless people before Duque's transmigration, still had the shocking lethality of a supreme love saint here. When Duque said this, Servana's emotional defense began to collapse. The incomparably resolute Queen Sylvie, who seemed to be ready to die at the slightest disagreement, had lost all her strength at this moment and collapsed in Duke's arms. Every inch of her skin that was exposed to the air was flushed with embarrassment and unbearable redness. The red lips that once spat out sonorous words were now only left with gentle gasps. She no longer dared to look at Duque. She tilted her head to one side and finally, almost struggling to ask, "You haven't answered me yet. What are you going to do with us sisters? Humans can only have one legal wife, right? There are 3 of us. Also, don't you have a fiancé called Proudmoore? Gianna. That was also a problem." However, as a king of the harem mode, Duque was not afraid of any of this at all. Duque replied domineeringly, "At most, I will marry all of you sisters. Laws are made by humans. It just so happens that because of the years of war, human males have suffered heavy casualties. I will go back and change the alliance's laws to allow polygamy. As for Gianna, I hate political marriages that have no emotional foundation. No one can force me to marry a woman that I don't love. Nothing more than an abuse of power. This feels so good." "Really?" Servanas asked tactfully. Duque did not notice that Queen Sylvanas' eyes suddenly flashed a trace of slyness. "Of course." Duke slammed the table and replied in an imposing manner. At this moment, there was a very abrupt knock on the door. It was the voice of the goddamn bastard maid Vanessa. "Master Marcus, Miss Gianna Proudmoore has come to visit. Because Miss Proudmoore is your official fiancée, I took her directly to the door. Would you like to see her?" Already at the door, still not see her? Damn it. Looking at Queen Sylvanas, who was smiling like a flower in his arms, Duque's heart at this moment was filled with 10 billion curses. Damn it. You joined forces to trick me? Chapter 827. Duque was too careless. He was really too careless. As the saying goes, lust is like a knife above your head. In fact, the system elf did not use a mark to tell him that Jaina was approaching. At that moment, with a beauty in his arms, who the hell cared about the sensor's green data? Queen Sylvanas was also secretly playing tricks. She definitely knew that Jaina had been Duque's rumored fiancée for 10 years. Jaina's footsteps could not be hidden from her. Even though she had just lost her mind, her senses were still many times more sensitive than Duque's when she was so close. She clearly wanted Duque to say it himself. Looking at her blinking her watery and sly eyes, it was clear that she was using her eyes to say, "You said it yourself, I didn't force you." But her face was full of a cunning smile. Duque really wanted to pull open Queen Sylvanas' pants to see if there was a devil's tail behind her, but she must be a succubus spy sent by the Burning Legion. That's right. That's right. Duque could only grit his teeth in anger. Damn it. He had transmigrated to this world for so long that he almost forgot that Queen Sylvanas was quite two-faced in the original history. She tried to persuade Sasha to give up her life and become a forgotten one with her or something. Duque was speechless. And that damned maid Vanessa, needless to say, she, who had been with Kalia for 10 years, was at least not on Jaina's side. I'll deal with her later. But the most important thing now was to deal with Queen Sylvanas. Trying to trick me before even getting started? No way. This kind of evil must be resolutely dealt with. Duque looked like he had no choice but to give up. He hugged Queen Sylvanas' waist tightly, pinched her chin with his right hand, and made a gesture of forcing a kiss. If it was under normal circumstances, Servanas would have definitely rejected it. But outside the door was Jaina, the woman who had been showing off as Duque's fiancée for 10 years when her eldest sister and third sister were not around. Now that Duque had made a promise, she was very willing to give Duque some benefits and strike a blow to her rival in love. So Queen Sylvie put her arms around Duque's neck passionately, stretched her snow-white neck, closed her charming eyes, and offered a hot kiss. She made up her mind that when she kissed him later, she would definitely make the sound of water splashing and piss off the person outside the door. Who knew? He didn't receive an intense and passionate kiss. Instead, he felt a sharp pain in his nose. Woo woo woo. The tip of the nose was the most sensitive part of an elf. Queen Sylvie burst into tears when the tip of her nose was bitten. She hurriedly opened her eyes and saw Duque's vengeful gaze. Duque loosened his bite and pressed his lips against hers. This time, he fulfilled her wish from 3 seconds ago. It was a pity that the taste had changed. Queen Sylvie had already made up her mind to bite back at Duque if he dared to stick his tongue out. Duque actually guessed what she was thinking. He held her chin tightly with both hands. If he didn't open his mouth, how could he bite? It had become the purest kiss. What the hell was this? This time, it was Queen Sylvie's turn to grit her teeth. After a while, they separated. Duque smirked. This is a small return to you for tricking me. Queen Sylvie was angry. None of the Windrunner sisters were stupid. Of course, she understood that Duque wanted to establish dominance. Of course, she could fight, but after knowing him for so long, she knew very well that Duque would not be swayed by any constraints imposed on him. Look, the person outside the door was a living example. Back then, King Daylin and King Lang joined forces to hope that Duque would marry Jaina, but he resisted and refused. Duque was a man who could be persuaded but not cowed by force. Glancing at the silent door, Servanas threw Duke a resentful look, and then said softly, "I won't make things difficult for you." After saying that, she gave him a light kiss. Then, wearing high heels and an evening gown, Queen Sylvie nimbly jumped out of the window and disappeared into the night. Duque touched his lips, still feeling a little incredulous. He had thought that Queen Sylvie would take the opportunity to flip out. Coming back to his senses, Duque said loudly, "Come in, Jaina." The door opened, and Duque saw Jaina with her lips slightly pursed. Although she was still wearing her battle mage outfit, it was obvious that she had also put in a lot of effort. A light foundation, lightly drawn eyebrows, and just the right shade of lipstick. Because she was not wearing a cloak, her delicate shoulders, delicate collarbones, and fair waist were exposed. It was very tempting. Unfortunately, it seemed that all her efforts were in vain. Seeing that there was only Duque in the room, Jaina really heaved a sigh of relief. At least she didn't have to face this embarrassment. If Sylvanas was here to show off, she really didn't know what expression and attitude she should use to face her. The scene just now was equally awkward. She was like a block of wood at the door, not knowing whether to leave or stay. Her appearance was still dignified, and her temperament was still noble, but there was sadness in her eyes that couldn't be concealed. There had never been sparks of love between her and Duque, but they had been mentioned in the same breath since they were young. It wasn't just a political marriage. Ever since Jaina could understand, she knew what kind of fate she would have as a princess. To be honest, the long years of education in the palace had made her accept her fate early on. She used to be close to Arthes, but it was only a small adjustment under the premise that her fate didn't change. Unfortunately, fate seemed to be playing a joke on her. Arthes, whom she had favored back then, had fallen from a holy knight to a death knight, killed his father, and ended his own kingdom. Kale, who had also been considered, had chosen the wrong side and was exiled by his own people. He was about to be sent to the Dark Portal to guard the borders of the world. Even Garen Trollbane, who she didn't want to marry the most and had a bad reputation, and was one of the candidates for her husband, had now died and become an undead without a backbone. After going around in circles a few times, Jaina, who was forced by her father and the entire upper echelons of Cultivate to marry, was left with only one choice, Duque. After all, Duque was a Grand Duke who was the focus of attention, a great hero and the commander of the alliance. Marrying Duque was at least not a loss on the surface. She gained face, but suffered a loss. Since ancient times, most of the children of the royal family had been like this. Now that Duque had returned, he actually declared that no one could force him to marry someone he didn't love. Speaking of which, that was indeed the case. Whether it was Stormwind or Cultivate, they couldn't do anything to a genius like Duque, who was above the country. Now it was even more exaggerated. Whether it was Duque as a Breaking Dawn Archmage or the commander of the Alliance, either of these two identities couldn't do anything to him. Not to mention that there seemed to be a queen and an elf who was about to become a queen trying to steal her husband. Then what about her, who had been holding the title of Marquis fiancé for 10 years? Without any words, 2 lines of clear tears flowed down Jaina's beautiful face. Chapter 8:28. Duque had imagined many scenarios, such as Jaina throwing a tantrum at him, Jaina trying to reason with him, Jaina bringing Lin over to suppress him. However, Duque had never thought that Jaina would use the most primitive and feminine reaction to move his heart. Jaina's reputation of selling out her father had left a deep impression on him. He had avoided her as much as possible, feared her like a snake or a scorpion, and always kept his guard up against her. However, the prejudiced Duque had forgotten an important principle time and time again. While a person's nature was important, experiences were the core factors that shaped a person's personality. For example, children who had experienced domestic violence or grew up in a single-parent family would easily distrust their family. Another example would be children who had failed in everything they did since they were young. They would lack confidence when they grew up and would never have the ability to lead. Jaina's life path was very different from history. Although she was still not favored by her father Lin in this life, and Crown Prince then Reed already had a son, she would never be able to inherit the throne of Cultivation. However, she did not have to act like a social butterfly, flirting with idiots and rich men. All she wanted was a future. Wuxia had personally confirmed that Jaina had been very dutiful in the past 10 years. She did not even have a male dog by her side, much less a lover. The only things that kept her company were magic and business. "She's still a virgin," Wuxia had said temptingly at that time. Duque smiled bitterly. In this era where people had to get married in their teens, Jaina had undoubtedly become an old lady in the eyes of the world because she carried the title of his fiancée. Before Duque's transmigration, it was not uncommon for women to get married in their 30s. After all, there were many single men. In the circle of humans in Azeroth, she was at the level of an old hag. Even though Duque knew that Jaina's ambition was not here, gossip was a fearful thing. Duque suddenly felt guilty when he thought of this, and looked at the 2 streaks of tears on Jaina's face under the gentle light of the magic lamp. "I'm sorry, I didn't notice how you felt. I was being inconsiderate. I wanted to keep my private life separate." Jaina lowered her head weakly and looked at her toes. Then, she quickly raised her head again. Duque couldn't read her complicated eyes at all. Gianna clenched her fists tightly, her whole body tensing up. In the next moment, an almost hysterical roar erupted from that sexy little mouth. "I've been working hard to fall in love with you, Duque. But I've been your fiancé for more than 10 years in vain. I've always been thinking about how to change myself so that I can be more pleasing to you. But your heart has always been rejecting me. You haven't even given me a chance to start. You've already ruthlessly cut off all possibilities." With tears in her eyes, Jaina moved her trembling body and stepped forward with her left foot. "After I found out about you and Miss Aurelia and Miss Sasha, my court tutor told me that as long as the title of your wife belongs to me, I must pretend not to see anything. This is the rule of the nobles. Not to mention other kings, even my father did it. Then the right foot. I wasn't an adult then, but from that day onwards, I told myself that I had to endure it. I made myself a good student. Because that was the only time you wouldn't be wary of me." Then the 3rd step. Jaina was less than a meter away from Duque. She could clearly see every curve of shock on Duque's face. "Since I was a young girl until I became an adult, I've always been thinking about how to win your heart. Oh God of the sea, I was very depressed for a long time. Because my tutor and I started to think that you only liked high elves and not human women." The 4th step. The distance between the 2 was less than half a meter. 10 years. I waited for you for a full 10 years. A woman's golden and most beautiful moment was spent waiting. In order to avoid the torment in my heart, I didn't dare to read any romance novels. He even specialized in ice element magic. I spent almost all of these 10 years in the library and in the laboratory. The 5th step. At this point, the 2 could almost smell the hot breath coming out of each other's nostrils. "But you came back. Suddenly, just when the whole continent needed you the most, the great hero Duke Marcus came back. But when you came back, you accepted a Lucia Barov. That expression of a woman in love. No matter how you pretended that nothing happened, you couldn't even fool the guards. Only then did I know, oh, so you like human women too. Ah. Duke's Adam's apple moved a little. At this time, the tip of Jaina's nose was almost touching the tip of Duke's nose. It was a pair of infinitely sad blue eyes. First it was Countess Lucia, then Queen Kalia, and now Queen Sylvanas. How can I continue to pretend that nothing has happened? I can't take it anymore. Please tell me, what did I do to make you so disgusted and reject me? Even if I lose. Even if you cancel my fiancé status. Can you give me a reason to let me know why I lost? Phew. Duque let out a long breath and sorted out his thoughts. From the perspective of the engagement, even though this was a bad debt, even though he had never acknowledged this marriage, because of the accident of Karazhan's explosion, he had indeed dragged Jaina down. And the women he had offended were getting more and more powerful. In the past, he could still pretend that she was his secret lover and not see it. But then, the queen came out one after another as if she did not need money. If the engagement was broken, Jaina, who had no marriage partner, would not have to worry about being captured by Daylin and locked up in the palace for the rest of her life. But now that the Dalajan had been destroyed, it was understandable that Jaina would feel great pressure and indecisiveness. Jaina, no matter what, this is a bad debt. From the perspective of a noble, this is already unsolvable. But I just want to ask you, do you think that by marrying me and having a child to be my heir, you can fulfill your dream with peace of mind? Dream. Jaina's body trembled, and then she froze. Duque continued to patiently guide Jaina. According to the tradition of the royal family, if you marry a powerful person you don't like and simply become a tool to carry on the family line, without doing anything for the rest of your life, would you be willing? Would you be willing? There was almost no need to ask further. Jaina had already given the answer. Never. Absolutely not. How could I be willing? Chapter 829. As the saying went, beauties were picturesque. In the eyes of an artist, a beauty's every frown, smile, cry, or throw a tantrum could all be included in a painting. There were many famous beauties in the world of Azeroth. In terms of looks, blonde hair and blue eyes, which were very common here, did not add much to Jaina's score. In terms of figure, there were many women who were more voluptuous than Jaina. In the Alliance, no one was more famous or controversial than Jaina. Perhaps everyone often criticized Jaina's talent as a social butterfly. Or perhaps she sold her father and pretended to cry. However, it could not be forgotten that she was the one who promoted the first alliance between the Horde and the Alliance and participated in the Battle of Mount Hyjal. In that battle, the heroes of Azeroth faced Archimonde, the boss of the Burning Legion. He was a terrifying existence that surpassed a single alliance, Horde, and the self-enclosed Night Elves at that time. To be able to make a cross-faction alliance and personally go to the battlefield in front of a great enemy, it had to be said that Jaina's courage and boldness at that time were absolutely top-notch. Unfortunately, no one was perfect. Later in history, Jaina turned evil and did stupid things. That was another matter. Admittedly, Duque could marry her and use the righteous title of a legal husband to suppress Jaina and have sex with her. Then they would have sex every day and get pregnant. Then they would have to carry 2 or 4 babies every 3 years. When she joined the reincarnation guerrilla force and had babies everywhere, Duque did not believe that she would not become useless. However, history had changed greatly. Duque believed that after giving Jaina a strong dose of medicine back then, Jaina would no longer be so close to the orcs. Similarly, from the age of 13 to adulthood, the environment in which she grew up had been greatly purified. Now that Duque controlled the lifeline of the Alliance, Jaina should be controllable. So, it would be a waste to cripple Jaina. Looking at Jaina, who pursed her lips slightly and had a stubborn and wise glint in her eyes, Duque knew that he had finally found a balance on how to deal with Jaina. Duque sighed softly. As a commander, my vision is destined to be different from that of ordinary people. Give the Griffins a sky, give the generals a battlefield, and give the veterans a home to return to. I've always been an advocate of using things according to the person. Jaina, from the first day I met you, I knew that it would be a waste to lock someone as smart and wise as you up in the backyard. That would be a waste of Tiras, a waste of the entire alliance. When Duque said this, Jaina's face was still filled with shock. This kind of change was too unexpected, and it suddenly grasped her Achilles heel and scratched the most itchy part of her heart. Her maiden heart started to beat wildly against her will. The same person, when faced with the same situation, will make different choices due to their different personalities. For example, Kalia, I once asked her personally, if she was locked up in the palace, what would she do? Her answer was that she lamented her fate and bore it all in silence. Hence, when the historical Kalia fell, she did not choose to come out and claim the throne. Because she was locked up for more than 10 years, although she did not speak, she hated her father, Tyrrhenus. Instead, she lived in seclusion until the Burning Legion invaded a few decades later. When she was middle-aged, she came out again. When Duque mentioned Kalia, Jaina was undoubtedly deeply touched. Because, at the same time, there were not many princesses in the various human kingdoms. Jaina, you are different. Although forming a caravan seems like a silly move, in fact, you are building your own power. You have always been trying to resist your own fate. You are resisting the seemingly inevitable fate of being the daughter of the royal family, but having to marry and have children. Duque's words made Jaina feel as if her whole body was electrified. She could not tell if it was shock, or numbness. Her beautiful lips moved for a long time, but she could not squeeze out a word. I yearn for freedom and hate being bound by fate just like you. But I am different from you. I am not of noble birth, and I do not have the mindset of sacrificing myself for the family. Hence, I have always rejected political marriages from the very beginning. Since that is the case. Duque paused and took out a stack of documents and passed it to Jaina. Jaina took it in a daze. It was a list of refugees. This is, the northern continent of Lordaeron has been destroyed. Especially the former territory of Lordaeron. Other than the southernmost part of the continent near the Hillsbrad Hills, most of the areas have been infected by the plague. This continent can no longer support so many people, so migration is inevitable. Jaina raised her head. Didn't you say that, just like how South Shore took in the refugees from Stormwind during the last war, they would first take in the people to the western wilderness? That is generally the case, but you have forgotten one thing. The southern continent has a small population. When we moved all of them there were only about 600,000 people. The northern continent of Lordaeron has always been the main settlement of humans. We have calculated that even if we filled up Stormwind, it would not be able to accommodate all the refugees. Then, Duque brought Jaina to a table. There was a map of the southern continent pinned to the table. Whether the humans and high elves are willing or not, they have to open up new territory. For now, the direction is Stranglethorn Vale, south of the Twilight Forest. But it is not easy there because there are many trolls. Moreover, not everyone is willing to go to the southern continent with the Alliance. You mean? Jaina's heart beat faster. She seemed to have grasped what Duque wanted to say. Not only the people from Torrential Castle, but also the people from Gilness. Because their country once left the Alliance, even though I have already ordered them to treat the refugees equally. In fact, the refugees from these two countries are still severely discriminated against and even abused. At this point, Duque also sighed. He had left so many backup plans to prevent Jaina from courting death and inciting these people to travel across the ocean with her. Who knew that at this point, there were many things that could not be solved with a single order from him. There were policies from above and countermeasures from below. If the people above said no, the people below would still pay lip service. There were even soldiers from Stormwind who bullied the refugees from these two countries. Duque did not have so much energy to care about such details. In the end, many of the people who escaped from these two countries really became refugees among refugees. If left alone, they would be abused to death sooner or later. This was a chaotic world. It was normal for thousands of refugees to die. Jaina, I hope to establish a bridgehead for the Alliance in the Kalandor continent. On one side, it is to monitor the Horde, and on the other side, it is to deal with the possible invasion of the Calamity Army. I want to give this task to you. Can you do it? Chapter 830. In the past 10 years, Jaina was not someone who had been through the trials and tribulations. After all, she had not experienced the battle of the Dark Portal, so she could not be considered to be independent. At best, she was only involved in some small side business. In history, she had participated in the investigation of the plague with Arthas before the outbreak of the cataclysm. She had also experienced the massacre in Stratholme. She was completely mature. Although she had the title of a Dalajan counselor given to her by Duque, she was still a rookie who had not been through the baptism of war. It was impossible to say that she was not nervous. However, building a bridgehead for the alliance across the continent was something that even the elite pioneers might not be able to do well. She did not believe that she was being biased. She did have a plan for Theramore, but it was based on the premise that Mediva's prophecy came true and the situation of the entire Rotterdam collapsed. Mediva's prophecy was now half correct. The scourge was strong, but with Duque's efforts, the situation was not beyond redemption. Now, the alliance and the scourge were evenly matched. When the situation collapsed, no one would say anything about how she brought the refugees away. At the very least, she saved a large group of people, didn't she? If the situation did not collapse, she would take a large number of refugees away from the Eastern Kingdom without permission when the alliance organized a large number of refugees to go south. This was undoubtedly a betrayal to the alliance. Not to mention her father, Dai Lin, would not let her go. If Duque sent her there as the alliance commander, it would be a completely different matter. Not only was it legitimate, but it also meant that she would have strong support. Theramore was definitely a place that was far away from the Emperor. If she managed it well, she would be a queen in the truest sense. She would be able to jump out of Kurtira's restraints. If she was more ruthless, even Duque would not be able to control her after she gained a firm foothold. This prospect made her, who had long been restless, unable to suppress the excitement in her heart. How about it? Jaina, are you willing to do this job? Jaina was stunned by Duque's question for a full 3 seconds before she came back to her senses. She replied almost hurriedly, "Yes. Yes, of course I'm willing." The last word was practically roared out. Duque smiled. In his heart, he couldn't stop laughing. Theramore was a giant pit. When the relationship between the Alliance and the Horde was good, Theramore could make do with it. If their relationship wasn't good, who had ever seen a lion living next to a tiger's den? Now, the Night Elves were a group of self-enclosed xenophobes who were still muttering, "Long live the forest." Someone had to show the existence of the human race. Since he was going to send someone over anyway, he might as well send Jaina, the experienced technician. Anyway, with the trauma of almost being killed by the orcs at a young age, Duque was really not afraid of her sincere cooperation with Sal. Moreover, since Duque dared to bring it up, he must have a backup plan. At this moment, if Jaina was a man, then the scene before him would be a typical scene of a king and his minister enjoying each other's company, and a gentleman dying for his bosom friend. If Duque's body trembled, Jaina would have kowtowed to him. Well, the above content is a little classical. But Jaina was so happy that she almost fainted. "You really support me to prove myself? Aren't you afraid that I'll screw it up? I haven't proven myself in any field. I only know a bit of magic." Jaina covered her heaving chest. Well, it was quite pleasing to the eye. The true gentleman Duque opened the system elf's video recording while staring into Jaina's eyes. Duque smiled faintly. "Isn't this good for you, for me, for the refugees, and for the alliance? You want to start a career. I don't want a political marriage that I don't like. The refugees need a sanctuary. The alliance needs a pioneer to monitor the horde. Since it's good for everyone, I can't think of any reason to refuse." What Duque said made sense. As smart as Jaina was, she actually couldn't find any flaws. "But my father, I'll take care of His Majesty Daylin," Duque agreed immediately. A political marriage was just a part of a political exchange. As long as the bargaining chips were sufficient, it wouldn't be a big problem. Besides, things were different now. As long as Duque refused to acknowledge the engagement, Dalen couldn't ignore the pressure from the Rotterdam and Kuel Salis, and forced Duque to marry Jaina. What about manpower and resources? You won't be left out. I, Duque, have always been open and aboveboard in the alliance. When have you ever seen me resort to underhanded tricks? The success of the development depends on your strength, decisiveness, and luck. It definitely has nothing to do with logistics. At this moment, Duque secretly activated the moral integrity that Alonso's fail had inherited. The great sage Du has shown himself. In any case, this time, Jaina was really touched to the point that she almost burst into tears. She pursed her red lips and squirmed for a while. Finally, she revealed a genuine smile that came from the bottom of her heart since she became an adult. It was nighttime, but it felt like dawn. It was midsummer, but it felt like early spring. An extremely beautiful woman who had abandoned her scheming, and pretense, and revealed a smile that was so beautiful that it made Duque feel as if he would suffocate due to excessive excitement at any time. Her bright eyes smiled, and her smile could topple a city. At this moment, her beauty would last forever. Thank you, Duque. Duque lowered his head, feeling a little embarrassed. You're welcome. If this is anything, just take it as an opportunity that you've exchanged for with the golden name of Madame Marcus. Yes, Duque's current status in the alliance was so important that any other noble girl would want to be his wife even if she had to live half her life. Jaina was different. She had truly inherited the will and legacy of the sea hero, Dalen Proudmoore. From the beginning, she was not the kind of woman who was willing to be a mistress at home. The heroic bloodline that flowed in her drove her to take risks and explore the world. Give the canary a birdcage. Give the seagull an ocean. Give the dragon a piece of the sky. This was Duque's way, and the best way. Feeling Duque's extraordinary courage, at this moment, Jaina's heart, which she thought had long been dead, showed signs of loosening. Unknowingly, a trace of red flew to her cheeks. Jaina couldn't help but tease. It seems that giving up the status of your wife is a big loss for me. Duque smiled. Oh, is that so? Whether it's a loss or a gain, only one's feelings are the most real. I never care about the judgment of others. It's just that if I fail, what should I do? Father will definitely not want me, and my second brother will not welcome me back to Cultivation. At that time, even my followers won't believe me. Won't I be miserable? Chapter 8:31. At this moment, Duque smiled. If it was Servanas, who was still a high elf, he would definitely stick to his heart and move forward. But Jaina was too smart and good at judging the situation. Before calculating victory, she would first calculate defeat. That was how people like her were described. Her undying ambition drove her to be restless. On the other hand, she was also afraid of failure. In a sense, this also meant that she could not be the real boss. Who had ever seen a boss who was overcautious and could still achieve great things? According to the laws of horror anime or television series before Duque traveled to this world, people like her would not live to see the second episode. Duque smiled. At this time, what Jaina needed was a little encouragement. Duque knew this, but he was angry and wanted to tease Jaina. The Dalajan will definitely be rebuilt. In the future, Kirin Tor will be very important. Jaina did not show any weakness. She tilted her head a little slyly and smiled. I am already a Kirin Tor. Duque knew that Jaina would not be moved by what she already had, but he played dumb. Then there is no problem. He was up to no good. Jaina was not stupid. Suddenly, Jaina opened her arms and hugged him. Her movements were very slow. So slow that even if Duque was an ordinary person, he could have dodged 100 times. But her eyes were telling Duque, if you don't let me hug you, I will regret it. Duque gritted his teeth and let Jaina do as she pleased. It would be a lie to say that he was not excited when a beauty hugged him. Duque could clearly feel the roundness and softness of the two magic peaks. It was different from the Windrunner sisters. This was another kind of extreme. The elasticity of a female ranger that had been trained for a long time was not something an ordinary woman could have. On the contrary, Jaina's soft, shape-shifting touch was something that even the Windrunner sisters could not learn. Even through the clothes, he could feel the smoothness. This was definitely another kind of depravity. Jaina Proudmoore, are you sure you're not a succubus spy sent by the Burning Legion? At this time, Jaina suddenly breathed into Duque's ear and said in a soft, sweet voice, I have a treasure that I have kept for 27 years. I have never let anyone touch it. No matter what happens, from the past, to the present, to the future, this treasure of mine will only be left for you. However, this treasure has a shelf life. I'm afraid that after 30 years, it will deteriorate and people will look down on it. So, can I trouble you to come and take it when you're in a good mood or have time within these 2 years? Holy shit! There was actually such a mysterious treasure in this world? Moreover, it's a treasure that only belongs to me? Damn no way. If I enter a treasure mountain and return empty-handed, then I am not Duque. My honest and reliable husband. A gentleman of honor, Du Moque. How could he not happily accept such a treasure? Duque knew what Jaina was thinking. If she couldn't be his wife, then she could be his lover, right? With Duque as her backing, she would be much more at ease. This wasn't Jaina playing Duque with an empty promise. As long as Duque was willing, the treasure would immediately be in his hands. And it was the kind of magical treasure that no one could take away once it was taken. Thinking about it, Duque was speechless. Unfortunately, the next moment, Duque came to his senses. He had just been tricked by Queen Sylvanas a few minutes ago, so he deliberately changed the system elf's detection mode. Then, at this moment, the system elf's red text prompt was, detected a female human and a high elf near you, listening mode. *CK, listen to hell. If Vanessa, who was eavesdropping outside the door, reported it to Kalia, and then Queen Sylvanas would fly into a rage, and it would directly turn into a civil war in the Alliance. All of a sudden, all of Duque's primitive impulses were gone. He didn't know where to put his arm, but he finally hugged Jaina in a very proper posture. I'm not such a heartless person. If someone treats me with sincerity, I will return the favor with sincerity. The Marcus family's territory is quite large. Not to mention a Radiant Moon Wizard Tower, even a Breaking Dawn Wizard Tower wouldn't be a problem. Jaina was naturally willing to take away Jaina's treasure now. Firstly, it wasn't the right time, and secondly, that would put Duque at a disadvantage. Unknowingly, the atmosphere had instead turned into a faint sense of warmth. In a sense, it was also beyond Duque and Jaina's expectations. No one had thought that the atmosphere would become so subtle. Was this considered above friends, but not yet lovers? Jaina left with a satisfied expression. Duque felt bitter. Originally, he still had the fire that Jaina had stirred up. Who knew that not long after Jaina left, a female voice that was obviously jealous came in the wind. Oh, little brother Duque, I also have a magical treasure here. However, unlike the treasures of humans, the treasures of us high elves have a long shelf life. I don't mind keeping it for 1,000 or 800 years. You can go look for those treasures that have a short shelf life. Don't worry about me. After saying that, the owner of the voice disappeared without giving Duque a chance to refute. Duque almost choked to death. The bitter Duque scratched his head and struck while the iron was hot to find Delin. At first, the angry roars of King Delin could be heard from Delin's private cabin, but it quickly became silent. At dawn, an announcement jointly issued by Duque and King Delin spread to the upper echelons of the alliance. It probably meant that the marriage between Duque and Jaina was not approved by Duque himself. Such a marriage alliance was no longer suitable, and both parties agreed to cancel the marriage amicably. Duque compensated Kurtiras with a 36-page gift. If it was during peacetime, this would definitely be an astronomical amount of compensation. However, during the duration of the Battle of Calamity known as the Third Battle of the Dark Portal, many things were actually useless. Money and luxuries were not as practical as a team of fully armed elite soldiers or a cart of uncontaminated food. As for the news of Princess Jaina Proudmoore forming an expeditionary force and opening a new safe harbor on the Kalimdor continent on the other side of the Endless Ocean, it did not cause much of a reaction among the upper echelons of the alliance. Instead, as Duque expected, It caused an enthusiastic response among the refugees of Gilness and Strongard. At this time, Duque immediately had a headache because of the aftermath of the annulment of the marriage. Duque had become a single dog in theory. However, what made Duque most unbearable was that bastard Mograine. He did not hesitate to let Abendis use the teleportation portal to rush back to Silvery Moon City to find out what was going on. To put it nicely, he was asking about how to purify the Eastern Plague Lands and how to deal with the possible attack of the Scourge army. In fact, he was here to promote his own queen. Duque had a headache. Fortunately, something saved Duque. Chapter 8:32. The Sunwell could not hold on any longer. At first, the High Elves tried to ask Riadaline, Gina Goldsword, and other external help to see if they could change the internal circulation flow of the Sunwell or activate the self-purification system of the Sunwell to purify the plague. After all, in their imagination, the water of the Sunwell, which represented high temperature and holy purification, would definitely be able to purify the plague associated with the resurrection of a mere Great Lich. Unfortunately, the situation was far beyond their imagination. The polluted area in the Sunwell was expanding. They could not even divide it, let alone purify it. With the betrayal of the Sun King and the almost complete annihilation of the high-level mages, the power of the High Elves alone was not enough. No matter how much they regarded the Sunwell as a national treasure that outsiders could not touch, they had to bend their knees and ask for help from the only Breaking Dawn mage in the Alliance, Duque. Yes, Duque had a good relationship with the Windrunner sisters. Duque might become the husband of the possible queen of Quel Salis. The High Elves comforted themselves. The one who came was Rothamar Theron. With the utmost humility, she asked for Duque's help. That humble look made Abendis, who was next to Duque, almost suspect that Rothamar was a human farmer who had never seen a high noble before. "Let's go." Duque did not comment. He was not the scapegoat, so he naturally did not have to take the blame. If his memory was right, he should be able to use this incident to reap the greatest benefits. The tall and majestic Sunwell stood on the highest peak of the Sunwell Highland. Because of the resurrection of Kel, Fizad, the walls of the Sunwell were like cliffs. Standing on the edge of the well, one could overlook the entire Isle of Quel Danas. 6,800 years ago, when the High Elves exiled to the east, under the leadership of Dasrima Sunstrider, built this huge well with the water from the Well of Eternity, they used magic to combine the stone and the trees into one. Even from the perspective of modern people who had flourished with magic, they still felt that this was simply a miracle. Without experiencing it personally, it was impossible to feel that kind of shock. Even Duque, a transmigrator who had seen the capital's big underpants, the bird's nest, the Sydney banana leaf, and other magical modern buildings, could not help but be moved. The walls of the well were made of a single piece of rectangular volcanic rock weighing at least 1,000 tons. After being polished and cut, they were perfectly inlaid into one piece. Just this alone was enough to make any crane company on Earth before his transmigration feel ashamed and close down. Huge vine-type evergreen plants tightly wrapped around the walls of the well, and hundreds of huge ancient trees mysteriously intertwined. At the top of the Well of the Sun was a group of magnificent buildings reinforced by rocks. The spire of the High Elves' luxurious tower could be seen everywhere. From the floor to the walls to the ceiling, beautiful and complicated patterns filled Duque's vision. It was not hard to imagine how many elves were touched when the palaces were first built on top of the Well of the Sun. Unfortunately, such a Sunwell Highland was now daunting. The Calamity Army had destroyed everything. There was clearly a warm sun in the sky, but the dilapidated and terrifying scene was easily reminiscent of a stormy night. Even though the remaining High Elves had moved away all the corpses of the elves who had died in battle and the Undying, and even used more puppets to forcefully drag away the broken arcane puppets, the mysterious aura of decay shrouded the entire Well of the Sun. That blackish-green aura made everyone who was staring at it quickly avert their eyes. Every elf that came in and out wore at least a mask. The closer the elves were to the Well of the Sun, the more tightly they wrapped themselves, and even wore a mask filter made by the Marcus family on their faces. 7 layers of gauze and activated charcoal made Duque brand filter. You deserve it. If it were not for the sacred well of the sun, these long ears would probably not be willing to wear such ugly gas masks even if they died. Duque wanted to snicker, but he managed to hold it in. Under Lord Themar's lead, Duque finally passed through the palace that was full of dilapidated tiles and came to the side of the well of the sun. It was a huge pool of bubbling black water. It looked a little like hogwash for pigs, and a little like ink mixed with vegetable juice and leftover soup. It emitted a disgusting smell and evil aura. Lord Themar wanted to hand a filter mask to Duque, but stopped halfway and smiled bitterly. How embarrassing! The gas mask was invented by Duque. Duque would not know whether to use it or not. Moreover, even though there was a pungent wind around them, the blackish-green aura in the air was clearly discernible to the naked eye. When it blew in front of Duque, it was dispelled by the faint golden light emitted from Duque's body. This was a perfect example of being immune to all poisons. Please follow me. Lord Themar bent even lower without realizing it. Following Lord Themar and the new team of Well of the Sun Guardians, Duque did not walk towards the path that led to a certain boss in his memory, but to the other side. A road made of stone dams led straight to the center of the Well of the Sun. He did not need to look around to feel that there was no longer a trace of peace in the well. There was still a hint of green at the edge of the well, but it was pure black here. Unlike usual, the lake water was even more turbulent than at the edge of the well. Near the center of the well, there were huge waves that even a battleship might not be able to withstand. The roaring black waves slammed hard against the small island in the center of the well, which was wrapped in volcanic rock that was full of magic runes. No, it was no longer just well water. Near the center of the well, there was lightning. The surging waves flashed gold, crimson, and finally all faded to black. Thunder rumbled as if 1,000 dragons were galloping from the side of the well. On the center of the well island, Duque finally saw Servanas, as well as Lilith, Hadgeron, Gina Jinjian, Riadaline, and the other remaining high-level elves. Every elf had a sorrowful expression on their faces, and there were still traces of tears at the corner of Servanas' eyes. Seeing Duque come over, Servanas squeezed out a bitter smile that did not have much hope. Duque, I really want to say that I'm counting on you for the Well of the Sun, but I can't bring myself to say such irresponsible words. If I had let you come from the start, the situation might have been better. At this point, a few high-level elven mages lowered their heads. With the divine artifact of the Well of the Sun, the high elves still had a very deep foundation. Now, there were actually 3 radiant moon mages standing here. The other 2 were like Gina Jinjian, royal mages who were worshipped by various countries. One was from Lordaeron, and the other was previously a magic consultant in Torrential Fortress. Chapter 8:33. Duque waved his hand. Don't blame them. They're just trying to save the Sunwell. What if I told you that my judgment from the moment the Sunwell was polluted was that it had to be blown up? Would you accept it? The faces of all the high elves turned as pale as paper. Right? It was a cruel but correct judgment. Even though they knew that what Duke said was very likely correct, the glory and inheritance of their nation still made them subconsciously ignore this incomparably correct decision. Until the situation got out of hand. Servanas asked Lord Themar to hand over a report written in Elvish. She knew that Duque could understand it. She nodded as Duque flipped through it. Gina Goldsword explained in a heavy voice, the sun well isn't just the well itself. The veins of the sun well cover most of the kingdom. They go straight through Silvermoon and split into 3 branches that cover the entire Long Song Forest. So, if the pollution isn't cleaned up, the most direct result is that the plague will continue to spread throughout the kingdom. We estimate that in another month, the entire kingdom will be barren. Duke glanced at the water in the well. The system elf's high-speed calculations caused countless numbers of data to pour down from the top of his left retina like a stream of light. Duque shook his head. You didn't calculate the spread of the pollution. When the core is completely polluted, the spread of the pollution will be more than 1,000 times faster than it is now. You only have 3 days left. 69 hours, to be exact. Hiss. All the elves gasped. If it weren't for the holy light shield that Riadaline and the other clerics had put up, all the elves would probably have inhaled a few breaths of the poisonous gas. Then, there was a burst of sobbing. Servanas pursed his lips. What's the worst and best outcome? The worst outcome is that my control fails, and the entire Isle of Quell, Donnas and the branches of the magic power will explode into the sky. The pollution will spread, and everything within 1,000 miles will become a dead land. Unless a large number of druids and clerics work together, ordinary people won't be able to live here for the next 300 years. As soon as Duque finished, everyone was silent. Servanas didn't know when, but his fingernails had already sunk deep into his palm. He suddenly raised his head. What's the best? Duque raised his first finger. If my control is successful, I will drive the pollution to a certain place and detonate it. This area will become a land of death, and it must be sealed for 1,000 years. No one is allowed to enter or leave. Otherwise, if it is leaked, all humans and animals within a radius of several hundred kilometers will die. Then the second finger. Sacrifice is not without cost. In that case, the Isle of Quell, Donnas and the Long Song Forest were likely to be preserved intact. At the very least, Quell Salis is not a land of death. Please give me some time alone with Duque. Sylvanas nodded to the other elves, then walked in front and led Duque into a side hall of the palace. The side hall wasn't big, only about 20 square meters. It had the typical luxurious decorations of the High Elves. Just as the door closed, Duque was suddenly hugged by Sylvanas. Sorry, I didn't want to put all the pressure on your shoulders. But I can't think of any other choice. He used to think that Sylvanas was a fighter who fought against fate and never gave up. In history, when the natural disaster invaded, she swore to fight against Arthas until she was defeated and died. Then, when she saw a chance to fight back, she immediately led all her suffering compatriots to fight back against Arthas, even if they became undead. After realizing that she was already a dead person and could not return to the embrace of her compatriots, she led all the Forgotten Ones to establish her own force in this world. But when Duque looked at the trembling shoulders, felt the intense heartbeat coming from his chest, and sensed the wet tears coming from his shoulders, Duque fell silent. That's right. The remaining High Elves longed for a wise leader. They also longed for a relatively intact home. On his way here, the word Duque heard the most was Nomarigan. Yes, one mistake, and Quell Salis would become another Nomarigan, a place of death that they could never return to. Gently hugging Sylvanas tightly, Duque comforted her. Don't worry, I have at least 80% confidence to protect 1/3 of the Sunwell. In fact, the system elf's judgment was even higher. Duque didn't dare to be too sure. Really? There was surprise and infinite hope in her misty eyes. She quickly wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes and said, if even 1/10 of the Sunwell can be protected, then the new Sindorii kingdom will be stable. Internal affairs are not my forte. I will bring the most elite warriors and follow you to take revenge on the Calamity Army. Even if you have to go to the end of hell, I will accompany you. Duque suddenly laughed. You don't have to go to the end of hell. When Aurelia and Sasha come back, you 3 sisters will be willing to have a pillow fight with me on the bed. They were talking about serious matters and swearing, but Duque was so good at it. In the blink of an eye, the solemn atmosphere was ruined. Sylvanas was just about to yell at Duque, but she suddenly realized that she was not nervous anymore. She burst out laughing. Although your joke is very shameful, thank you. I really feel much better now. Wait, did you misunderstand? I really want all 3 sisters to come at me together. Hey, Queen Sylvanas, did you misunderstand something? What about my benefits? Aren't you afraid that I will go on strike without benefits? Looking at Duque's disappointed look, Queen Sylvanas pinched his waist hard. Brat, let's get this done first. After saying that, she waved her hand, opened the door, and left. There was only one word left on Duque's face. The emergency evacuation order was issued. All the elves were mobilized to evacuate every survivor out of the range of the magical ley line, to the seaside, or outside the Long Song Forest. The next night, it was a stormy night. No one knew what kind of dawn the next day would bring. Would it be the destruction of darkness? Or the rebirth of the elves? Around the highland of the Sunwell, the guards who had already left their wills or said goodbye to their families were wearing red armor with golden edges. They held double-headed crescent swords in their right hands and kite shields in their left hands. Together with rangers and battle mages, they formed small teams and looked around carefully. Not only did they monitor the island for trespassers, but they also paid special attention to the movements inside from time to time, especially the huge wellhead made of volcanic rocks. Because any one of them could sense that an unpredictable and mysterious power was being nurtured. On the central island of the Sunwell, Duque exhaled and looked at Queen Sylvanas, who was guarding him. Let's begin. Chapter 8:34. Standing on Wellin Island, one could see that Duque and Queen Sylvanas were already isolated from the outside world, even though they seemed to still be on the island. The space defense array that originated from the founder of the kingdom, Dathrima Sunstrider, had completely separated Wellin Island from the outside world. When Arthas invaded the Well of the Sun, Dathrima's remnant soul had made the most heroic resistance for the survival of the High Elves. Unfortunately, he had failed. Arthas had directly torn apart such a rotten soul that was not even worth subduing. The rest of the things that had not been activated in time were all taken by Duque. Duque thought to himself, these things are the price I have to pay for preserving half of Kuel Salis. The system elf silently recorded the composition of the magic array and analyzed all the possibilities of the array's evolution. The radiant moon elven mages by the well all had their mouths wide open. At this moment, Duque was wearing a pearl robe inlaid with 108 arcane gems. The red robe was inlaid with golden edges of the sun pattern, intertwined with round high elven inscriptions, and hung to the ground. The center of the magic array pattern under his feet was engraved with many profound ancient elven words that non-elven elders could not understand. It seemed to be the finishing touch. Duque's raising of his hand and raising of his foot coincided with the ancient casting gestures of the High Elves. Many auxiliary gestures used for strengthening and amplification were lost even in Kuel Salis. Duque's movements were slow, and he looked quiet and focused. Yet, serious men always had a kind of magic that captivated people's hearts. Especially when Duque was wearing the robe that had been passed down from Dathrima and kept in the museum of the Silver Moon Council, his image overlapped with Dathrima's. More than one elf uttered the same words as Gina Goldsword. They murmured, "Why do I feel like I'm seeing His Majesty Dathrima?" Looking at Duque preparing to cast a spell, every high elf suddenly felt that it was not so uncomfortable to let a human like Duque preside over the Well of the Sun. It was no longer a desperate and painful compromise for the continuation of their race and kingdom, but a true inheritance. When clouds surged, not just the wind and the clouds, but also magic power. Something was moving toward the Well of the Sun quickly. All the elves could not help but look at the red-robed figure by the Sunwell, the former Prince Kale. He should have left Kuel Salis a long time ago, but due to the pollution of the Sunwell, Kale, was summoned back again. However, there was no resentment on the face of this pure-hearted prince, only the same worry as the other elves. If he had not submitted to his father, perhaps he would have inherited the throne and made the painful decision of destroying the Well of the Sun. Right now, he was just a spectator. "Your Highness, do you really not need our help?" Great Astromancer Solarian whispered into Kale, "Ear, if you really don't need us, we might as well leave." From Solarian's point of view, she could either join in the operation to save the Well of the Sun in order to wash away the prince's shame and stain, or she could simply leave to protect herself. He would not be in an awkward position like he was now. Kale shook his head as if he was not answering the question. 13 years ago, at the end of the second gate of darkness. At that time, Duque was far from being this strong. He was already able to use Antonida's hand to control the powerful magic power of the Gate of Darkness, which was not inferior to the Well of the Sun, and successfully close the Gate of Darkness. In terms of control, Duque is the best in the world. We have to trust him. This was not seeking progress, but also not seeking safety. In the hearts of several hardcore fans, This was the worst choice. However, this was the decision of the prince they were loyal to bet everything on Duque. Solarian lowered her head, took half a step back, and did not speak. In fact, Kale, that's had deliberately misspoken. He could deceive the melee professionals under him, but he definitely couldn't deceive the astromancers. Perhaps the magic power of the Gate of Darkness and the Well of the Sun was on the same level, but in fact, there was a huge difference between the two. The Gate of Darkness itself did not produce magic power. On the contrary, it was a huge magic tool that simply consumed magic power. The magic power used by Ghoul Dan to open the Gate of Darkness came mainly from the soul energy obtained from killing a large number of Draenei, as well as the extraction of the life energy of the entire planet Draenor. The magic power of the Gate of Darkness was huge, but its magic power would not increase by itself. Moreover, what maintained the Gate of Darkness in the later stages was the extraction of life energy from the Swamp of Sorrow, which was now the Cursed Land. The Well of Sun was different. The Well of Sun was like a nuclear power plant that was constantly undergoing nuclear fission. The current pollution was the biggest interference to its energy production process. In the ancient war 10,000 years ago, because a series of magic reactions interfered with the energy of the water of the first Well of Eternity, there was a big explosion, which led to what later generations called the Cataclysm. The entire Kalimdor continent was split into several pieces, mainly the Kalimdor continent in the west, the Eastern Kingdom in the east, Northrend in the north, and Pandaria in the south. The original location of the well collapsed into an endless whirlpool. Thus, this tragic war was called the Ancient War. The Well of Sun also originated from the Well of Eternity. If it exploded, because of its relatively low energy level, it wouldn't be possible to blow up the entire Eastern Kingdom. It wouldn't be difficult to blow up the entire old territory of Kuel Salis into the sky. Even though he was standing next to him, Kale, that was still gambling with Duque with his life. Duque glanced at Kai Z, smiled and nodded. Then, he thought to himself, "You're willing to follow me with your life, so of course I won't let you suffer." Duque calmed his mind and began to activate the magic array further. Before he started, he had already felt that the energy in the Well of Sun was like a ball that had been squeezed, extended, and squeezed again. If the magic power of the Well of Sun was flour, it wouldn't be a big deal. But in front of the magnification effect of the system ELF, which was like a super high-power microscope, Duque could see that the molecules of magic power had become very loose and unstable. The magic power molecules played out the process from birth to youth, to aging, to death. Each process became shorter and shorter. Duque gently pressed his hands forward. Suddenly, the muddy well water in front of him sprayed into the sky, turning into countless rainbows that flickered with strange colors, some of which Kale, that's had never seen before. The well water kept erupting, soaring into the sky with a momentum even more violent than a volcanic eruption. People who didn't know better would think that it was fireworks blooming in the sky, disappearing and blooming again. Each blooming became more and more mysterious and blurry. Chapter 8:35. Hundreds of miles away, the elves on the beach could see the pillar of light rising into the sky. Looking at the strange black and green rainbows that emitted an ominous aura, the timid elves' legs began to shake incessantly, and their backs were drenched in cold sweat. Even though they knew that this was a safe area declared by the National Rescue Committee, some elves still fled in the direction of the Well of the Sun in a panic. Of course, more elves stared in the direction of the Pillar of Light with complicated expressions. The glory of the Sunwell had favored the High Elves for nearly 7,000 years. There were very few elves of the older generation who had witnessed the birth of the Sunwell. Most of them did not burn out their lifespans, but were lost in the nearly 4,000-year war with the Trolls. The rest were basically the elders of various small families. Those who could survive the invasion of the Calamity Army were rare existences. Almost all the new generation of elves grew up under the glory of the Sunwell. Under the protection of the giant magic circle, they enjoyed more than 2,800 years of comfort. It was not until the two battles of the Dark Portal that their fantasy of hiding in a safe protective shell for the rest of their lives was completely shattered. The expressions on their faces were extremely complicated. If it were not for the appearance of Sylvanas, perhaps they would not even know where their future was. The dark green water vapor rolling in the sky seemed to be the grin of the Lich King Nizul. More than one elf saw a huge skull laughing silently in a trance. And in the midst of the skeleton's laughter, a second feeling of horror came. Seeing the pillar of light was a visual one. Feeling the tremor was a tactile one. The more direct feeling of the body gave the elves a more terrifying shock. Boom, boom. The Isle of Quell, Donna's, was shaking violently. The tremor was more violent than an earthquake, and it directly set off a tsunami. It was as if an ancient behemoth was awakening at the bottom of the sea, letting out bursts of roars. Aha! Some elven children screamed. Don't be afraid. Lady Sylvanas, who is about to become the queen, will protect us. The mother comforted her child. However, it was useless. Don't be afraid. The Duque who used the war flag to repel the evil orcs will protect us. Miraculously, despite their sniffles, the children actually stopped crying. Whether they were willing or not, in the hearts of the elves, Duque, who had saved Kuel Salis twice, had already become sacred. The huge waves caused by the tsunami rushed towards the seaside in an overwhelming manner. If it weren't for what happened next, it would have been a terrible disaster. Out of nowhere, a gigantic wall of air that was 1,000 meters tall suddenly appeared on the beach, separating the entire beach from the sea. The shockingly huge waves that were more than 10 meters high hit the surface of the air wall. Golden magic runes appeared and disappeared into thin air after the waves subsided. Along with the crashing of the huge waves, it repeatedly appeared and disappeared. After listening to the explanation from the middle-level elven commander, the civilians finally understood why they were evacuated here. This was the magic array that Darima had left behind back then. It was to protect the people at the last moment in case the mana of the Sunwell went berserk one day and the elves had to evacuate. Although the magic array was driven by the mana of the Sunwell, it operated independently. It only needed to be recharged once a year to ensure that it could be activated at any time for the next year. Under the protection of the magic array, tens of thousands of elves silently watched the destruction of the Sunwell. That was the end of an era. Hot and turbid well water sprayed into the sky, and a blazing aura swept across the sky. Occasionally, birds would fly by, but they would be immediately devoured by the flames, leaving nothing behind. Flash, flash, flash. The water in the Sunwell, which was more than a kilometer in diameter, was boiling. At first glance, the water in the entire well was flowing counterclockwise, turning into a huge vortex. However, near the island in the well where Duque was, the water in the well surged clockwise under the urging of the magic array. To the surprise of Kale, and the other elves, the water in the Sunwell was like two gears of different diameters with the wrong thread, colliding and rubbing against each other at the intersection of the two streams. This is... Kale, eyes were filled with disbelief. With Duque as the center, the inner circle became brighter and brighter under the high-speed rotation, while the outer circle became more and more turbid and black. At first, everyone thought it was an illusion. Soon, everyone saw a huge contrast between the inner circle and the outer circle, which could be seen clearly with the naked eye. Suddenly, the light of the magic runes on the huge well wall northwest of the Sunwell flickered. After a few breaths, several pieces of the well wall collapsed. A turbid torrent with a diameter of at least 100 meters emitted a deafening sizzling sound and shot out from the gap like lightning. No, it shouldn't be like this. Very abruptly, the will of the Lich King descended again. The image of the white skull in the void was very blurry, but the sharp voice, the common language with a strong orc accent, undoubtedly confirmed his identity. Duque, you actually broke my secret plan? So what? On the island in the well, a huge shadow of Duque stood up. His shadow's face was full of disdain. No, nothing much. Unexpectedly, Nizul's reaction should be a laugh? I don't like a degraded imitation like the Sunwell. If you want to save it, then save it. But soon you will know what I am going to do. Ha, ha. Accompanied by a burst of laughter, the will of the Lich King came quickly and disappeared without a trace. In the eyes of others, Nuzul was purely there to watch. Only Duque understood the meaning of Nuzul's words. It seemed that, as in history, Archimonde, one of the 3 giants of the Burning Legion, was about to arrive. What Archimonde was interested in, of course, was not the sun well made from a cup of water from the Well of Eternity. At least Nuzul was not wrong. Even the current Well of Eternity was an imitation of the original. How could Archimonde be interested in an imitation of an imitation? Fortunately, if the Lich King did not come to make trouble, Duque's chances of dealing with the Sunwell were a little higher. Duque raised his right hand and made a pushing gesture. At the same time, the 100-meter-tall shadow of Duque did the same. For a time, the sewage from the Sunwell began to spin wildly on the seaside of the Isle of Quel Danas. Like a whirlpool, everything around it was sucked in. Trees, turf, gravel on the seaside, and even larger pieces of rugged rocks. Everything was crushed and then kept stirring in the whirlpool. Gradually, a ball larger than a hill appeared. Chapter 8:36. Everyone could see that Duque had expelled all the filth from the Sunwell in one go and then made it into a ball. Every elf's face revealed an expression of infinite surprise. None of them had thought that Duque could actually use the magic formation left behind by Darima to successfully expel the pollutants. Why couldn't Gina Goldsword and the others use the same magic formation passed down by their ancestors? Solarian was forbidden to touch the Sunwell. With this question in mind, she looked at Duque. She suddenly discovered something that shocked her beyond control. Duque was actually modifying Darima's ancient magic formation at the same time. Heavens! Even she, who specialized in the ancient language and was known as the new generation of elven scholars, did not dare to say that she could immediately translate the complicated ancient elven language. Not only did Duke understand it, he even modified it on the spot and made some minor adjustments. It had to be known that Duque was controlling the Sunwell. It wasn't easy to control the normal Sunwell, and with a large amount of pollutants present, the difficulty was more than 100 times higher. Solarian's slender figure trembled incessantly. This was a shock that came from the depths of her soul. Once upon a time, the biggest reason why she was loyal to Prince Kale, that was because she admired the prince's talent in magic. That talent of easily mastering any elven magic was definitely something that only appeared once in 1,000 years. Although Kale, that was stuck at the Breaking Dawn level, this perfection had never been broken until Duque appeared. Seeing Duque's proficient self-taught techniques, as well as his courage and ability to easily modify the predecessors, Solarian's worldview began to be completely overturned. Kale, that was said to be a magic genius that only appeared once in 1,000 years, then Duque was 1 in 10,000 years. Without comparison, there would be no harm. They were both geniuses, but Kale, who had spent more than 1,000 years stuck at the Radiant Moon level, could not even compare to Antonidas, who was also known as a genius that only appeared once in 5,000 years, let alone Duque, who had broken through to the Breaking Dawn level before the age of 30. It definitely did not feel good to be surpassed by human geniuses again and again. Unknowingly, tears welled up in Solarian's eyes. In fact, she was not the only one who cried when she saw the collapse of the Sunwell, but her tears were not ordinary tears. No one paid attention to this astromancer's performance. The shadow of Duque's palm seemed to be rubbing a mud ball as he continuously poured the black well water into the mud ball and stirred it. Finally, a super black ball with a diameter of more than 3 kilometers appeared in everyone's sight. From afar, if one ignored its huge size, it might look similar to the dark cuisine in Duque's anime. It was also a terrifying existence that emitted a black aura. Next, more soil flew out from the sea on the island and gathered on the dumpling. Go! Duke stretched out his left index finger, and dozens of glittering magic runes flew out from his finger. They became bigger and bigger, until each rune was as big as a carriage, and they covered the ball in an instant. A few seconds later, after the diameter of the round ball rose to 5 kilometers, it finally stopped growing, and then suddenly began to roll into the sea. Surprise was written all over Servanaz's face. This is Duque rolled his eyes at her. Is there a need to ask? It's better for you to die than for me. If his estimation was correct, before the magic power was exhausted, the ball would melt in the ocean currents and finally be absorbed by the huge whirlpool in the middle of the endless sea. If one had to say who would be tricked in the end, it would probably be some race living in the deep sea. For example, the Nagas. The deep-sea Nagas led by Vashj. Or the Naga queen of Azhara, who thought of herself as noble or something like that. Anyway, what Duque was doing now was similar to the nuclear power plant explosion in a certain island country before he transmigrated, which caused all the countries in the Pacific to bleed. But there shouldn't be any races in the alliance of faith at the bottom of the sea, right? Anyway, the elves weren't oceanists. So, cough cough. The immoral Duque pretended not to think about the development of the situation. Well, so what if all the guys outside the alliance died? What does it have to do with me? That was the logic. Of course, in Queen Silvani's eyes, Duque was doing all he could to protect her and the Long Song forest that she loved. He risked the huge risk of magic backlash to send the contaminants away. Queen Silvani's red lips were like fish in the water, opening and closing. Tears welled up in her eyes, and her entire chest was filled with love. The elves looked at the water level of the sun well, which had dropped significantly but had clearly become pure, with ecstatic expressions on their faces. Unexpectedly, Duque poured cold water on them. Attention! The explosion is coming! A loud roar scared all the elves nearby. They checked their protective magic arrays repeatedly. Because if the magic arrays were broken, not only would they die, but also all the witnesses under the protection of their magic arrays. Why would the purified sun well explode? There was a simple scientific principle involved here. Explosions usually consisted of two parts. One was that there had to be combustibles, and the other was that the narrow space was filled with dust or something. Duque was indeed discharging the contaminants, but the Scourge Army's contamination of the sun well was not as simple as solid particle contamination. If it was solid, like in a certain pure water advertisement, it would be solved with 18 layers of filtration. That was the contamination and impurity on the soul level. With the help of the system elves and magic arrays, Duque could indeed separate the uncontaminated well water from the heavily contaminated well water. But the part in between was not so easy to deal with. The simplest method was still to destroy all the well water in that part. But how? Suddenly, all the elves heard a loud roar coming from the ruins of Silvermoon City. A huge water elemental with a filthy aura all over its body stood up. Its body was dark green, and it was filled with a disgusting dark aura. It was extremely huge. Originally, only its head was sticking out of the city wall. As Duque continued to inject the impure sun well water into the branch of magical power that led to Silvermoon City, this polluted water elemental rapidly grew in size. In the blink of an eye, it became a super monster over 100 meters tall, and its body was still growing. Duke, what are you doing? Cervanus let out a cry of alarm. Duke smiled lightly. It's a monster that uses pollutants as its core. It will instinctively absorb the pollutants in the well water as nourishment for growth. When it stops growing, it will be the time when all the pollutants are gone. However, we will need to pay a price to destroy it. First, we can't destroy it in the water. Then, destroying it will also require more magic power. Chapter 8:37. This theory sounded like a paradox. How could an evil creature that had evolved from its essence be destroyed by another power that had changed its essence? In fact, magic power was the origin, just like the sea was the cradle of life. But after evolution, could the various creatures that it had turned into still be the same? The giant polluted water element used the part of the water that was related to the water in the well. Like a magnet, it sucked away all the impurities in the well water that it could absorb. However, its essence was already a water element that was independent of the sun well, not the well water of the sun well. In the beginning, it absorbed the pollutants in the well water like rivers flowing into the ocean. However, with its poor intelligence, it could not understand that the power it absorbed was only a small portion of the remaining water in the sun well. Furthermore, it did not have the ultimate control of this power. After a few dozen breaths, it discovered, sullenly, that the polluted elements it desired would not come by themselves. Creatures instinctively pursued survival, even if it was a water elemental creature. It began to transform its limbs and absorb the pollutants from deeper and closer to the source. Unexpectedly, in the next moment, there was another wave of extremely large amounts of pollutants. This amount was so huge that it had to retract its limbs, or it would immediately burst from the huge amount of pollutants. It greedily and hungrily digested the new wave of pollutants, not realizing at all that the supply of pollutants had stopped, and that an incomparably large amount of pure energy was quickly being transformed into fire elements. The well water of the sun well was essentially liquefied arcane energy. It was like a huge arcane circuit and the foundation of all kinds of elemental magic power. It could indeed be transformed into various types of elemental magic power. However, the well water of the sun well was biased towards the fire element. If the efficiency of the well water turning into frost elements was 1, then the efficiency of turning into fire elements was 10. Otherwise, why would the Sunstrider's entire family play with fire instead of water and frost? This was also a local adaptation. The next moment, Duque activated a huge magic array that had been set up in the ruins of Silver Moon City yesterday. This was a medium-sized magic array that was based on the remnants of the original magic array. Of course, it was incomparable to the huge magic array that had been set up in the Long Song Forest, but it was enough to deal with this water element. 72 scorching golden magic chains appeared out of thin air, easily capturing the water elementals who were immersed in the pleasure of increasing their power. At this moment, the huge water elemental, which was more than 200 meters tall, was forced to compress its body in the net. It was extremely suffocating in the shrinking space. It had no choice but to bend its body, turning from a burly fatty into a huge water ball. Roar! A beast-like roar resounded throughout the ruins. The polluted water elemental opened its 2 huge dark green eyes and looked around, trying to find the enemy who trapped it. The dirty water elements in his body suddenly boiled like an erupting volcano. His terrifying strength was enough to stand at the peak of the mortal world. Coupled with the abundant magic power that had been strengthened, this shocking aura was enough to make any mortal below the heroic domain faint. Unfortunately, its power, its violence, and even its very existence were only a part of Duque's plan. Explode! Duque shouted. A huge beam of light that was not inferior to the one that he had used to detonate the sun-chasing royal court that day suddenly appeared under the feet of the water elemental, and in an instant, it was completely wrapped in it. Gua! After a strange cry with unknown meaning, it was followed by a dazzling light for a full 10 seconds, followed by an earth-shattering roar that made every elf's sensitive ears ring. In their field of vision, gravity seemed to have disappeared, and countless large and small stones were blasted into the sky by the huge impact. The small ones were only the size of a fist, the bigger ones were like carriages, and the bigger ones were the fragments of the rose-colored mage towers that had once stood in every corner of the entire city. The ruins of these mage towers that had collapsed into several sections were still relatively well preserved because the towers had been hardened and engraved with a large number of magic-resistant runes. But now, they had suffered a second explosion. The previous explosion only detonated one branch vein. This time, it was a big explosion that occurred with the full supply of magic power from the sunwell itself. Rumble! The huge explosion could be clearly heard hundreds of kilometers away. The elves by the sea watched this scene in horror. Even though they had long been informed that the ruins of Silver Moon City would be abandoned as the price to save the sunwell, they had never imagined that Silver Moon City, which they had regarded as a symbol of glory for thousands of years, would be blown into the sky. It would be so shocking and soul-stirring. The laymen watched the show, while the experts saw the artistry. At this moment, countless high-level mages had already seen that the explosion was only for show. Along the walls of Silver Moon City, huge beams of light shot into the sky. They formed a 3-dimensional magic formation that limited the direction of the explosion and the shockwave. It could only develop upwards and not horizontally. This had become the most prominent feature of the industrial age on Earth. The chimney. The so-called chimney was actually a damn thing that harmed others without benefiting oneself. The pollutants seemed to float away into the sky, but in reality, after floating in the atmosphere, pollutants that were heavy enough would eventually fall. Looking at the notification from the system ELF, according to the current data monitoring and the collection of the ocean airflow, it is determined that 99.8% of the pollutants will float away along the air current of the endless sea. It is estimated that 63% of the pollutants will fall into the endless sea and 38.2% of the pollutants will float away along the stratosphere of the world of Azeroth, eventually landing on the other side of the sea in Azhara and the land to be named Durotor, as well as several areas further west. The remaining pollutants cannot be calculated. There will be 0.2% of the pollutants remaining in the ruins of Silver Moon City. Yes, Azhara was the territory of those demons, satyrs, and whatnot. No problem. Durotor. If a certain chief still decided to build Durotor there, then no problem. Still the same sentence. If it's not the territory of the Alliance, it's none of my business. Someone with a dark heart chuckled. The elves could not possibly know what Duque had done. They only knew that what they had dreamed of and wanted to see had once again appeared in front of them. It was the crystal-clear water of the well. It was holy water that glowed with golden light. It was the glory of the high elves that had been passed down for nearly 7,000 years. Chapter 8:38. Although it couldn't be compared to the lake-sized one, the small pool of pure sunwell water at the bottom of the well, even if it was just enough for a few people to bathe in, was undoubtedly telling them that Duque had succeeded. A human had selflessly saved the glory of the high elves. Duque. Servanas couldn't control himself at all. He picked up the slightly weak Duque and kissed him. Her slender and strong arms wrapped around his neck, and her other hand held his chin, kissing him like a chick pecking at grains. Well, if the one taking the initiative was a man, there would be no problem at all. Unfortunately, the one taking the initiative was Queen Sylvanas. Kisses fell like rain, and Duque was dumbfounded. To make matters worse, due to some unspeakable reason, his body was 90% paralyzed. Woo-woo. Although it wasn't bad, Duque felt a sense of sorrow, as if he had lost his manhood. He almost burst into tears. Kale, that smiled faintly. Hadron couldn't stop laughing. Lore. Thema held her forehead, speechless. Gina Goldsword suddenly thought of King Dalin. Riadaline seemed to be in a dilemma, and Lillis's mouth was in an O shape, mumbling something like, brother-in-law, second brother-in-law, and third brother-in-law are all Duque? After a while, Servanas suddenly realized that he had been a little too enthusiastic. He screamed, and disappeared from the sight of the high elves in a few leaps. The pitiful Duque fell flat on his face, and it took him a while to come back to his senses. Unfortunately, his mind was still spinning, and in the end, it was his maid, Vanessa, who sometimes did naughty things, who rushed over and picked him up. Duque, are you all right? Vanessa asked. Lord Marcus, what's wrong? Lore. Thema asked nervously. Yes, Servanas, who had returned from spying somewhere, also sent a nervous whisper of the wind. I forgot to ask you, are you all right? Duque smiled bitterly and said, I'm fine. It's just that controlling such a complicated and difficult magic array consumed too much of my physical and mental power. This sentence was, in fact, an absolute lie. At this time, Duque looked inside himself and saw that his body was like a huge universe. The thick magic circuits were like rivers in the sky, and the magic nodes formed by the intersection of each circuit were like stars, blooming with dazzling brilliance. Between his eyebrows was the Earth imagined by the master of the stars, Duque. Using Earth to control the solar system, using the solar system to control the entire Milky Way, and using the Milky Way to control the entire universe. Of course, the idea that Earth was the center of the universe was purely a delusion of the ancients. Who asked Duque to be an Earthling? Therefore, Duque, who was an idealist, had unknowingly taken Earth as his boss. He would control 10 with 1 and control 100 with 10. he would continue to expand and eventually control everything in the internal universe. If he had not reached this step, Duque would never have imagined that the mind and soul of a human could be used to create such a complicated and even inconceivable super magic circuit system in such a small area of the human body. As expected, the mysteries of the human body cannot be explored to the end even if you exhaust your entire life. The human body is a huge treasure trove. The soul is the treasure trove of treasures, the most dazzling jewel in the crown. Duque was still in awe. On the other side, Duque could not help but snicker at the system elf's evaluation of him as a level 5 Breaking Dawn Great Wizard. Right? That's right. At this moment, Duque could truly be considered to have stepped through the threshold of a Breaking Dawn wizard and rushed from a level 6 star to a level 5 star in one spurt of energy. It couldn't be helped. If it were an ordinary wizard, they might not be able to wait to advance after obtaining Antonida's pile of magic circuits. Duke couldn't do it. Back then, when he had opened the magic circuits of ice, fire, and arcane magic in one go, he knew that he would need at least 3 times more magic circuits than a mage of a single element in order to advance in rank. In fact, according to the system elf's calculations, to perfectly advance the 3 evolved magic circuits in the Dragon Slumber Temple, the total amount of mana needed was not 3 times, but 3 to the power of 3. How much was 3 times 3, and then 3 times 3? That was right. That's 27 times the insane amount. The magic circuits that Antonidas had provided had only reached the standard of 3 times, which was far from enough. Thus, even though Duque had the aura of an incomparably powerful Breaking Dawn wizard, he was still a radiant moon deep down. However, everything was different now. Blowing up the Sunwell had caused an astronomical amount of mana to evaporate and disperse into the air due to the explosion. As the main controller, Duque had obtained the greatest benefit. 90% of the remaining batch of pure Sunwell water had been compressed and stored in Duque's body under the cover of the explosion. It was all used to build his magic circuits. In such a short period of time, Duque's magic circuits had expanded more than 100 times. But because Duque used all the mana to build the magic circuits in his body, it gave others the feeling that Duque had been hollowed out. A bunch of elves shed tears of gratitude for a super thief who had almost scooped up the entire Sunwell. Perhaps, this was Duque taking advantage of the situation and still pretending to be innocent? Even Best Actor Duke had to endure for a long time before he could barely hold back his laughter. Of course, if it weren't for Duque expelling the pollutants, the Sunwell would have exploded. Duque panted heavily. The Sunwell is now purified. Unfortunately, the loss is too great, so it can't be used for the time being. But as long as it's well kept, it should be able to recover 1/10 of its original energy in 100 years. Thank you, Lord Marcus. Long live Lord Marcus. Praise you. You are the eternal brother of Sindorii. The elves cheered loudly. For the blood elves, who had thousands of years of lifespan, it was good enough as long as there was hope. What was a mere 100 years? All of the elves were applauding with all their might, and all of their beautiful faces were glowing and brimming with smiles. The weak Duque waved his hand and left the Sunwell with the help of Vanessa and Sylvanus, who had run out again. After leaving the Sunwell Highlands, Duque suddenly saw Bendis pacing back and forth anxiously at the gate of the Sunwell Highlands. Seeing Duque come out, Bendis was delighted at first, but then he froze. There was a worry on his face that couldn't be dispersed. Duque even saw the muscles on Bendis' face twitching slightly. What's wrong? Just say it. Although I can't fight for now, I'm still the commander of the Alliance. Bendis gritted his teeth. Stratholme is under siege. Chapter 839. What? Duke's brows furrowed tightly. As the commander, he knew that the Alliance and the Scourge army were fighting fiercely near the Sodoril River. Due to the sufficient military strength and the fact that Queen Kalia, the legitimate heir, had inherited the throne of Lordaeron in time, the remaining people of Lordaeron in the old territory of Lordaeron had completely united and joined forces with the Alliance army led by Turalion to defend the eastern plague lands like an iron bucket. Yesterday, Duque had received reports that the two sides were still in a tug-of-war. How did the defense line collapse and the holy city of Stratholme get surrounded? Doesn't Alfred have a trump card? Duquest. Could it be Arthas himself? The trump card referred to dumping a large amount of holy water upstream of the Soderil River. Holy water was harmless to living beings, but to the undying, it was even more toxic than poison. Many times when the defense line at the Soderil River was about to collapse, the Scourge army had to rely on the holy water to cut off their offensive. Without reinforcements, no matter how strong the undead were, they would not be able to withstand the assault team personally led by Sidon Dathrahan or Turayan. Abendis shook his head. No, it's an Astrian. The former king personally used large-scale earth magic to change the course of the Soderil River. Duque bared his teeth. Damn it. So many variables. At this point, he could only take it one step at a time. In history, Arthas first settled Lordaeron internally, then went north through Stratholme to destroy Cuel Salis. Then he went south, ignoring the trembling Iron Stove Castle dwarves and the people of Stormwind City. He killed his way to the Blasted Land and summoned Archimonde's shadow at the Dark Portal. Finally, he turned around and flattened the Dalagen. In a sense, he had turned the entire Eastern Kingdom upside down. When he had no more goals, he returned to Lordaeron to rot, until the news of Archimonde's defeat came. The history that Duque was familiar with could basically be thrown into the endless sea, as it could only be used as a reference and not as an accurate one. They had saved Stratholme, only to be attacked by a Nastrian's personal army. It felt like they were in a mess. There were two reasons why Abendis had come looking for Duque. Firstly, most people believed that only a Breaking Dawn mage could deal with a Breaking Dawn mage. Secondly, the vanguard of the Scarlet Cross had rushed into Stratholme before the main army. If it was purely military reinforcements, it would definitely be a good thing. The more reinforcements there were, the higher the chances of defending the city. The problem was that there was a Breaking Dawn Great Mage on the other side, which meant that Stratholme would become a land of death. Of course, there was a reason why Abendis was in such a hurry: Stratholme City. The Azeroth human kingdom's economic system was more similar to Earth's medieval Western European feudal society. Basically, it was already amazing for a kingdom to have a decent main city. Most kingdoms only had one main city, which was called a city. The rest were towns or even lower settlements. Lordaeron, once the strongest human kingdom, was an exception. The two main cities were both a symbol of Lordaeron's strength and glory. As long as the holy city of Stratholme didn't fall, the people of Lordaeron could claim to the world that Lordaeron hadn't fallen. The battle around the city walls had entered a critical moment. A slim figure in red armor stood fearlessly on top of the city walls. She raised her hand and said in a slightly neutral voice, "Fire arrows." Behind her was a large number of archers with their bows knocked, their arrowheads wrapped in oilcloth lit with fire. They stood on the side of the city walls, in a temporary archer's position that had been rebuilt from flat roofs. Following her command, countless fire arrows shot into the sky at a 45-degree angle. When the arrows began to fall under the influence of gravity, they fell like a meteor shower onto the empty ground hundreds of meters away. The fire arrows ignited as soon as they came into contact with the flowing kerosene on the plains. The impure black kerosene immediately turned into thick smoke after it was ignited. If the attackers were humans, they would definitely be choked to death, unable to form any kind of formation. However, the enemies were the undying who felt no pain. She originally thought that the flames would at least be able to stop the enemies for a while. Seeing that the flames were about to burn the undying who were attempting to cross the sea of fire to reach Stratholme, she couldn't help but raise her eyebrows slightly. It was a counterattack that she had expected, although she didn't want to see it coming. Thunder rumbled from the forest in the distance. In the span of a few breaths, a large patch of dark clouds gathered above the treetops at high speed. Then, accompanied by a gust of wind that defied the Stratholme monsoon, the sudden snowfall extinguished the fire that had just started. Once the fire was extinguished, the blizzard continued to extend forward until it reached the city walls. The city walls of Stratholme lit up with purplish-blue magic runes. The gorgeous brilliance blocked the cold wind, but it couldn't stop the accumulation of snow and ice. At a speed visible to the naked eye, a huge slope that was more than 300 meters wide appeared in front of the human soldiers. The slope extended from the flat ground all the way to the battlements of the city walls. The 30-meter-tall city walls of Stratholme suddenly became meaningless. Not only that, but countless hailstones formed in the air and rained down on the infantry positions at the top of the city walls. The soldiers of the Scarlet Cross had no choice but to raise their shields and bear the impact of the falling hailstones with their flesh and blood. Crack, crack. The continuous loud noises caused flesh and blood to fly everywhere. As long as the iron-coated wooden shields were destroyed, the thin helmets of the soldiers couldn't withstand the impact of the hailstones at all. In an instant, there was a cacophony of screams. If it had been an ordinary militia defending the city walls, their morale would have collapsed instantly, and they would have turned around and fled. Fortunately, the soldiers defending the city walls were the toughest, most fanatical, and most capable soldiers of the Scarlet Cross in the entire Rotterdam. Even though the neat formation was full of holes from the hailstones, the soldiers who could still move immediately struggled to get up when the hailstones slowed down. They formed a thin line of soldiers and tried to use their flesh and blood to resist the impact of the undying who were rushing up the slope. Damn it! Can't you mages do something? The female colonel in blood-red armor yelled angrily. Her angry yet determined gaze and manly movements formed a sharp contrast with her sexy and charming figure. It was so strong and shocking that it left a deep impression on the soldiers. Unfortunately, her roar didn't get any response. Almost, finally, a red-haired male mage with a scar on his nose stood up shakily. He smiled bitterly and said, "No matter what, I can't let my master, Duke Marcus, down." Chapter 840. The cold wind tore at Ronin's red hair, his face brimming with fighting spirit. The wizard who had taken the initiative to come to the front lines smiled. Looking at the one and only disciple of Marcus, the blonde female knight in red armor who was brimming with holy light revealed a doubtful gaze. "Are you all right? Your colleagues are exhausted to the point of collapsing." The female knight had just been complaining about the wizard's lack of effort, but now that there was a volunteer, she felt a little embarrassed. She knew that she could not blame the wizards. The Undying's lineup was even more terrifying. A Breaking Dawn Great Lich and Nastrian led a large group of Radiant Moon Liches. These former allies of the elves had become the greatest threat to the living after they fell. If not for the other side rushing into the city, the legendary Holy Knight Cyandathrahan might have rushed out and killed them, and Stratholme would have fallen in less than half a day. But now, the enemy was casting spells from afar, closing in step by step. The defenders could not hold on any longer. The biggest problem was that they did not have a Breaking Dawn wizard on their side. Despite Ronin's courage, his rank was too low, and this was the biggest problem. He was clearly a disciple of the legendary wizard Duke Marcus, but his development was completely different from that of Duque's other disciple and fiancée, Jaina. More than a decade had passed, and Jaina had risen from an insignificant wizard to a Radiant Moon Great Wizard. But Ronin was stuck at the Morning Star realm, unable to advance. Outsiders always secretly mocked Duque for being blind and taking in a lousy student. Only Ronin knew what kind of path he was taking. Master Duque's words echoed in his ears every night when he woke up from his dreams. "Ronin, don't doubt it. You and Jaina are both geniuses among geniuses. But the two of you have completely different paths to walk. Jaina's forte lies in change. Using limited magic to create the greatest change and damage is her path. And your path is the arcane magic. As the foundation of most elemental magic, the arcane magic has never been the most offensive, but its endurance is the best. If Jaina needed mana to become a Breaking Dawn Great Wizard, then the mana you needed would be the Endless Sea. It sounds unfair to you, but when you succeed, you'll realize that you're far more powerful than Jaina can imagine. No one else knew that ever since 13 years ago, Duque had sealed 90% of Luo Ning's magic circuits with Luo Ning's consent. He could clearly feel how exaggerated his arcane circuits were, and how shocking the magic power flowing in them was, but he could only use 1/10 of it. What kind of grievance was this? What kind of oppression was this? More than once, Luo Ning wanted to tear off the seal on the circuit. Duque did tell him the method to tear off the seal. At the same time, he had another order. I won't let you die without opening the seal. What you need to do is just to accumulate your strength. The later you break the seal, the stronger the power you will be able to unleash. The decision is in your hands, your hand. Back then, Duque had sent Luo Ning away knowing that there would be a battle in Karazhan. That deep blessing still echoed in Luo Ning's ears. So many years had passed. Even when his master was not around, the Marcus family's support for Luo Ning had never decreased. They provided Luo Ning with everything he needed, in accordance to the standards of a peak radiant moon wizard. In the East Valley city of the Elven Forest, there was even a tower specially built for Luo Ning. On the surface, it was a radiant moon tower, but in reality, it could be expanded into a breaking dawn tower at any time. All of this made Luo Ning feel that Duque was indebted to him. Luo Ning looked at the radiant moon lich that was less than 100 meters away from the city walls, surrounded by death knights. He could feel the female holy knight's hope, and with the two remaining radiant moon wizards of Lordaeron injured, Luo Ning said heroically, "Colonel Abendis, I can try." Yes, in front of Ronan was General Abendis's daughter, Bridget Abendis. She had entered the battlefield when she was only 14 years old, and in the past 3 years, she had made countless contributions in the small-scale battles against the orcs. Now, at the age of 17, she had already become a colonel. Bridget's beautiful golden eyebrows raised, and he asked, "How confident are you?" 30%. Oh. Without saying anything else, Bridget raised the white kite shield in his left hand and gripped the warhammer in his right. Luo Ning frowned, "You're betting 30% with me?" Dalajan. You will never understand the weight of the word Stratholme in the hearts of the people of Lordaeron. Just like how we cannot understand your Dalajan's obsession with magic. This probability is enough for me to bet my life 3 times. Not to mention that you are Uncle Marcus' disciple. 5 times is enough. Bridget laughed out loud. Is that the dusk of desperation? Is that the darkness of the banners? Under the leadership of a female knight who could be considered a young lady, less than 100 Scarlet Cross soldiers and a red-haired mage launched a desperate counterattack against the undying army of the Scourge army that was surging towards them. Leave the Death Knights to me. Without the slightest hesitation, Bridget used his golden light to block the dark attacks aimed at Luo Ning. Luo Ning charged forward quickly, not even using flash or any speed-boosting spells. In his eyes, there was only the sneering lich who looked like a high elf from afar. As a lich who had voluntarily turned into a human, the former Silver Moon Counselor had a face that was more resistant to decay than ordinary undead. The power of darkness acted as his cells and continued to activate his muscles. Apart from his pale face and the ferocious skull staff in his hand, he was no different from a high elf mage. Looking at Luo Ning who bravely charged forward, he felt an extraordinary jealousy. It was jealousy towards the living. It was also a way to vent his dissatisfaction towards his own situation. If he could turn Quell, the loss, into a nation of the dead after being coerced into becoming an undead and continue to rule over his compatriots, perhaps Shank would feel much better. Unfortunately, everything had taken a turn for the worse with Duke's appearance. They followed the king and betrayed their people, but only received the title of traitor. The one that Arthas trusted the most was Kel Thuzad, who was resurrected by the Sunwell, and not an Astrian, the king of Luo Ning. This made Luo Ning's position even more awkward. Luo Ning, who could command tens of thousands of elves, could only command tens of thousands of stupid human farmers who had turned into undead. This made Luo Ning very unhappy. Chapter 841. He felt that this was a real demotion. However, being able to take down Stratholme, which the damned Lordaeron valued the most, would make His Majesty's position even more secure. He was disdainful of the red-haired human mage who had charged into the fray, until he saw the golden emblem of the Marcus family, Duke Marcus? Him again. Not every member of the Marcus family had the right to wear the gold-rimmed blue storm crest. Only the core members had the right to wear it. The middle ones had silver edges, and most of them had copper or the more common black iron edges. The Lich laughed loudly. "Ha! You must be that useless disciple of the Marcus family, right? The Ronin who couldn't even advance to Radiant Moon after more than 10 years? Trash Ronin seemed to have become a common meme used by the Alliance and the Calamity Army. 13 years ago, Ronin had killed his comrades in the Dalajan and was forcefully taken in as a disciple by Duque. Many young mages were envious of him and regarded him as someone who overestimated his abilities and got lucky. Ronin's face twitched. Immediately after, he saw a rain of shadow arrows. Black bullets of light tore through the snow-white sky, and with a shrill cry of the soul, they announced their arrival to the world. Before the black rain of light could pour down, the Scarlet Cross warriors at the front had already fallen to the ground, clutching their heads in pain from the terrifying sound of their souls. In an instant, there were only 2 people left in the charge. One was Bridget, who raised his shield and charged into the encirclement of 5 Death Knights with an unstoppable momentum. The other was a red-haired mage who maintained his spell-casting posture while running at high speed. Countless people panted heavily on the battlements as they stared at this strange duo, a slender yet incomparably violent female holy knight, and a burly yet agile middle-aged mage. Perhaps they had lost their ability to fight due to the hail, or perhaps they did not have the courage to stand up due to fear. Even if they were waiting for the judgment of death, it did not stop them from looking at the final ray of hope that would charge out of this section of the wall. Would it be a deeper despair? Or would it be redemption filled with hope? No one knew what they were feeling at this moment. All they knew was that their gazes had been captured. "I am Ronin, a descendant of the Dalajan mage, inheritor of Duke Marcus." A self-satisfied shout was heard, followed by a seemingly ordinary arcane missile. Arcane missile, the most basic arcane offensive spell. 70% of Earth mages knew how to do it. However, it wasn't that there weren't many people who could play as well as Ronin, it was that there were none. It was just an arcane missile, but the onlookers felt as if they had seen a falling comet. Resplendent, dazzling. It was filled with the shock of tearing apart the heavens and earth. In the blink of an eye, the arcane bullets seemed to have split, and 4 new arcane bullets appeared in 4 directions. Luo Ning had already reached the limit of what a Morning Star wizard could do. The Lich's countenance changed slightly, the spiritual light flickering in his turbid eyes seemed to waver, but he still did not care. Even if a Morning Star wizard gave it his all, he would still only be a Morning Star. The difference in mana density and energy rank was enough for him to ignore Ronin's attack. In theory, that was the case. However, in the next moment, something that shocked him so much that his jaw almost fell off happened. 8 lifelike magic hands appeared next to the 5 arcane missiles. This time, 8 arcane missiles appeared. If his calculations weren't wrong, these 8 arcane missiles would hit him first even though he was the one who came later. This was definitely not at the level of a Morning Star. As expected, in the next moment, Ronin's surging mana appeared along with the 8 magic missiles. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. In just 3 steps, Ronin's aura unreasonably broke through the limits of a Morning Star and charged straight into the Radiant Moon realm. He was not an ordinary Radiant Moon either. The arcane spell radiating from his body flickered like lightning. In this snow-covered battlefield, almost every inch of the snow reflected Ronin's purplish-blue radiance. "This is impossible," the Lich cried out. Since ancient times, there had been cases of wizards advancing in battle. Those were isolated cases, and most wizards who advanced in battle had unstable auras. The sudden increase in mana was not something that a temporarily expanded magic circuit could easily adapt to. Ronin did not have this problem. Not only did he operate his circuit with ease, he seemed to have perfectly inherited his Master Duque's name of 100 Hands. Even more magic hands appeared around him. If the attack formed by the 13 magic missiles already looked like a purplish-blue awl, then after more magic missiles filled up the empty space around it, the range and number of missiles increased, easily surpassing the level of an arcane barrage. It became a terrifying attack that was not inferior to a torrential rain. To the onlookers, Ronin did not seem like a magic attack at all. It was like throwing a Christmas tree made of highly concentrated arcana magic power onto the Lich's face. No! The Lich screamed and flashed more than 100 meters away. Who knew that the arcane Christmas tree would accelerate under Ronin's control, drawing an unbelievable arc in the air and exploding the Lich. It looked like Ronin had used his small body to swing a huge blue machete that was more than 40 meters long and ruthlessly slashed at the dodging Lich. Bam! There was a huge explosion, and the Lich was blasted into smithereens without any suspense. Perhaps in the near future, he would be resurrected by the Lich King or the fallen Sun King. At least for now, he would not be able to cause any trouble to the defenders. Long live Ronin! No one knew who shouted first, but in an instant, deafening cheers sounded from the entire Stratholme west wall. While the Death Knights were stunned, Bridget used the warrior's signature skill, Shield Bash, and smashed the head of a Death Knight into smithereens. He then smashed the entire right arm of another Death Knight with his hammer and killed his way out of the encirclement, reuniting with Ronin. Hearing the cheers, Bridget smiled and said, "Uncle, well done." Just as Ronin was about to say something, something strange happened. Without any warning, a skinny finger with a shiny golden ring appeared in the air, and a cold light shot out from the finger, piercing through Ronin's two magic shields. Under Bridget's astonished gaze, Ronin's shoulder was pierced through, blood spurting out 4 to 5 meters away. The huge impact sent Ronin flying. Chapter 842. Who was it? Who could defeat a wizard who had risen to the peak of the Radiant Moon realm in one move? Everyone already had the answer, but none of them wanted to admit it. A rising human powerhouse had been defeated by an even more powerful and evil existence the moment he reached his new peak. 200 meters away from the city wall was a Lich dressed in luxurious clothes. His red robe with golden edges was a stark contrast to the blizzard, announcing his identity, the fallen Sun King, a Nastrian Sunstrider. His words were filled with endless darkness, and his voice spread throughout the battlefield. Peak of the Radiant Moon realm? What a good seedling. Or should I say that you're worthy of being Duke Marcus's disciple? That's precisely why I want to destroy you. Anastrian spread his arms wide, his fiery red robes like a huge bleeding heart that stimulated the visual nerves of every living person. Cough, cough. Ronin clutched his shoulder, struggling to get up from the ground in pain. He wasn't a wizard who specialized in ice magic, and he didn't have the ice barrier that could block even more powerful spells. The weak survivability of an arcane wizard was completely exposed at this moment. He tried to organize a counterattack, but the intense pain from his shoulder and the chaotic feedback from his magical circuits made him realize that he was in a hopeless predicament. This was the first time he had unsealed himself and displayed his power in front of the world. A veteran breaking dawn was indeed an existence that surpassed the imagination of mortals. Anastrian ignored Ronin's reaction and continued, "Duke, what a hateful name." He placed the shackles of the alliance around the necks of the high elves, turning the noble elves into slaves to fulfill his ambitions. Then he took away my only child, Kael'Utz. Duke, his sins are so grave that even extracting his soul and burning it with soul fire for 10,000 years won't be enough to quell the hatred in my heart. Mana so vast that it almost froze the air in the surroundings, rippling in a radius of several hundred meters. That terrifying mana was enough to make any mage feel despair. Just sensing it would make breathing difficult, not to mention fighting it. Ronin struggled to get up, but he didn't retreat. Because retreating was meaningless. At this moment, a fiery red female figure stood in front of him. It was Bridget Bendis. I'm the one who pulled you into the charge. At the very least, if you fail, I should be the one to accompany you. The female knight's expression was cold as she spoke of the heavy topic. What a beautiful friendship, or perhaps love. Anastrian's face turned cold, before he let out an even more unfathomable and sinister smile. If the only daughter of General Abendis and Marcus' disciple were to be turned into immortals, I think it would be very interesting just thinking about their expressions. The man and woman standing on the battlefield fell silent. I'd be very interested in taking the skull of the famous Sun King and hanging it in holy water at the entrance of Stratholme as a specimen. A male voice came from afar, and almost at the same time, the sound of galloping horses could be heard. A man and a horse emitted a dazzling golden light as they charged towards the Sun King from the towering walls of Stratholme along the long slope made of ice and snow. Unlike the warhorses of the mortal world, this paladin warhorse that was blessed with holy light was no exaggeration to say that it was a holy horse. Its speed was so fast that it left behind golden afterimages wherever the horse ran. Each afterimage could remain in the air for at least 2 to 3 seconds. It looked as if there was a streak of light extending from the walls to where the Sun King was. The horse galloped and slashed sideways. The skillful strike that had been used countless times to kill countless beastmen was easily dodged. The only thing the hammer hit was the Sun King's afterimage. After a flash, the Sun King, who had reappeared 100 meters away, was not angry at all. He sneered, "Sedan Dathrahan, you're not qualified to be my opponent. What if you count me in?" A loud voice sounded. Suddenly, the afterimage of a golden hammer flew in the air. The golden hammer almost hit the Sun King, but it was still dodged. The second flash within a second allowed the Sun King to easily dodge the second attack. The Sun King glanced at Turalian, who had rushed out of the city gate, and had an indescribable look of contempt on his face. "It's not enough even if I count you in." At this moment, a thunderous roar reverberated on the battlefield. Me! A ray of golden light suddenly shone from the left side of the Calamity army. In less than a tenth of a second, the golden light extended from left to right at high speed. It created a ripple in the ice-cold space and swept across the entire battlefield. Wherever it passed, rows of skeleton soldiers and zombies would turn into ashes, silently disappearing into the void. The golden ripples swept across the thick land and a straight, slanted black line appeared on the white snowfield. The black line split the undead army into two from left to right. Time seemed to have frozen at this moment. The Sun King finally lost his composure. He had to forcefully activate the third flash within a second. However, when his elegant figure appeared 100 meters away, there was an unconcealable look of horror on his face. He screamed, "No!" That was because 2 of his fingers on his left hand were scraped by the sneak attacker's attack and evaporated by the holy light. Anastrian was finally enraged. "Alexandros Mograine, you're courting death." The one who had arrived was naturally Mograine. The main force that he led had finally arrived at the most crucial moment. Unfortunately, even with his appearance, he still couldn't reverse the situation on the battlefield. The mage's flash was too flexible. The high-ranked mage's flash was even more insane. Not only could they use it continuously, but they could also flash to any place that was advantageous to them. Moreover, after their merciless and endless magical power was converted into magical damage, the continuous bombardment was something that even the paladins, who were known as cockroaches, couldn't withstand. That sneak attack just now was Mograine's best chance. It was going to be difficult next. If there were no accidents, the 3 paladins of the Alliance would be beaten up badly. All they had to do was use the powerful holy light to delay the moment of defeat. At this moment, without any warning, a golden illusory hand appeared out of thin air and grabbed Anastrian's body, pressing the Great Lich's head onto the battlefield. White snowflakes flew everywhere, revealing the solid black ground below. Anastrian's dead face and the crown on top of his head were pressed against the ground and rubbed forcefully. A familiar voice sounded. "Yo, Sun King. You purposely came to bully my disciple. You're really something." Chapter 843. Bridget, who was helping Ronan up, could not hide the surprise on her face. Dathrahan, Turalian, and Mograine also had expressions of surprise on their faces. Other than a certain weirdo, only Breaking Dawn Archmages could deal with Breaking Dawn Archmages. This was a consensus, more like common sense. If there was anyone in the Alliance who could fight against the fallen Sun King Anastrian, then that person would be Duque. Wasn't Duque helping those long ears deal with the contamination of the Sunwell? Already done? The three holy knights galloped towards the young figure who had stepped out of the portal and appeared in the middle of the battlefield. The white robe with blue edges was fluttering in the cold snowstorm, and the wide sleeves were swollen by the cold wind, making them abnormally fat. Beside him were countless low-level undead creatures. However, with his appearance, the undyings were like sandmen blown away by the wind, silently dissipating into the void, revealing a large empty space. There was no surging magical wave, nor was there a thunderous appearance. Duque just stood quietly on the battlefield, as if he was strolling in his own garden, full of comfort and joy. That temperament that was completely different from the cruelty of war made everyone look at Duque in a higher light. Ronin's eyes widened in disbelief, his long red hair seemed to be glowing. Duque smiled and nodded at Ronin, then tilted his head slightly. Colonel Abendis, please take Wizard Ronin down to treat his wounds. Bridget let out a long sigh of relief as she held Ronin's arm and brought him to the back. At this moment, there was a burst of magical power in the distance. A cold blue flame cut the golden hand summoned by Duque into several pieces, and the golden glow disappeared in the wind. Anastrian crawled up in a sorry state. Bastard! How dare you treat me like this? Huh? What did you say? How did I treat you? Like this? Like this? Or like this? Every expert on the battlefield was dumbfounded. To their astonishment, they saw one golden hand after another appearing out of thin air and slapping towards the Breaking Dawn expert, the Sun King, who had once held an incomparably noble status. Whether it was the black magic shield, the eggshell-like ice shield, with ice shards, or the signature ice magic skill, Ice Barrier, none of them could resist Duque's mysterious golden hands. Although none of the golden hands seemed to be able to inflict serious damage on the Sun King, it was still a slap to his face. These golden palms felt like phantoms. They easily passed through the Sun King's defense and slapped his face and body. As a lich, they were practically immune to physical attacks. Their rotting bodies did not have a single spot that could be considered fatal. As long as the phylactery was still there and the lich's soul was not damaged, they could resurrect infinitely and come to trouble you infinitely. It wasn't that Duque didn't understand this, but he just wanted to slap the Sun King in the face. A left slap. A slap to the right. A slap to the left and a slap to the right. Isn't this possible? Anastrian was dumbfounded. He had no idea how Duque had done it. It clearly looked like a holy attack, but the dark magic in his body did not react at all. He had already isolated all the external magic around him, but this pair of ghostly, illusory palms still kept slapping his face. Compared to the insignificant physical damage he had suffered, the damage to his spirit was greater. How could the once lofty Sun King, the elven hero, whose pride had exploded, withstand such an insult? He was almost going crazy. Finally, he could not take it anymore. He took out a very warrior-style helmet from his spatial bag and put it on. The small magic formation activated on it finally isolated Duque's seemingly nonsensical magic attacks. Even so, he had lost all his face. Duque, do you really think that all Breaking Dawn mages have the same strength? You just dealt with the crisis at the Well of the Sun and are exhausted. If we really fight, how can you be my match? The Sun King's shout made everyone's hearts hang in the air again. Duque had just dealt with the Well of the Sun and rushed over? Duque shrugged. It's indeed quite tiring to deal with the pollution at the Well of the Sun, but I can still kill you. Anastrian had once thought that as long as he did not have the support of the Well of the Sun, he would definitely be able to beat Duque like a dog under equal conditions. But obviously he was wrong. He could not figure out how Duque had managed to hit him just now. He only knew that it should have nothing to do with magic. Gritting his teeth, Anastrian fell into deep hesitation. He didn't know if he could deal with Duque, especially with Mograine holding Ashbringer and glaring at him like a tiger watching its prey. If he lost to Duque, the worst that could happen was that his body would be completely destroyed. Losing his original body was not fatal for a great lich, but it would not be fun at all if he was hit by the terrifying Ashbringer. Just now, the soles of the two fingers on his hand had disappeared simply by being scratched by the sword light from Ashbringer. They had disappeared forever. This proved that Ashbringer, as mentioned in the Doomsday Army's report on the Isle of Quell, Donnas, had the special effect of destroying evil souls. The Sun King stared at Duque. He really could not tell what was going on with Duque. Simply by sensing the elemental aura that was overflowing from Duque, he was definitely much more depressed than the last time he saw Duque. However, from his spiritual world vision, he could see that Duque's soul aura was more than twice as vigorous as last time. It was basically impossible for a mage of the same level to see through the operation of the other's magic circuit. They could only judge the general situation of the other party from the aura. The Sun King could not see anything, but he was sure that Duque's circuit was in a very ideal state at the moment. There was no circuit damage at all. In other words, Duque could normally produce a large amount of magic power in his body. Gritting his teeth, the Sun King made a decision. At this moment, he had no chance of winning against Duque and Mograine. After a cold snort, the Sun King's figure began to become blurry. At first, his silhouette could still be recognized, but later, it was as if his entire body was separated by a curtain of water. In just 2 seconds, the Sun King's figure completely disappeared into the air. Then, the dark clouds in the sky began to quickly dissipate. The sky cleared up. Chapter 844. The canopy of the undead in the sky had become the Calamity Army's signature attack. Almost as soon as the black sky receded, on the city wall, the distant army formation began to reverberate with cheers like a tsunami. The allies of the Rotterdam Kingdom were overjoyed. Ever since Arthas killed his father, a huge stone had been weighing on the hearts of the people of Lordaeron. Is Lordaeron going to be finished? Is the Menethil royal family going to end? Do we still have a future? Do we still have hope? In the end, Princess Kalia, who had been declared dead for more than a decade, magically appeared at the critical moment and stabilized the scattered hearts of the people. Then, with the addition of the Dark Portal's frontline army, they finally managed to defend the last psychological support of the people of Lordaeron, the holy city of Stratholme. This directly raised the morale of the people of Lordaeron to the peak. Long live! The holy city bless us! Long live His Excellency Duke Marcus! The soldiers, whether it was Mogaine's elite Scarlet Cross army, Sidon Dathrahan's Stratholme army, or Turalian's Dark Portal frontline army, were all cheering and raising their weapons high in the air. Clap, 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 clap. The sword and shield soldiers beat their shields with their broadswords rhythmically, making a loud sound like a drum. Surrounded by the 3 paladins, Duque could only rely on the help of Mogaine's personal guards to open the way to enter Stratholme through the crowded and fanatical crowd. It was natural for old friends to reunite after a long time. Unlike Mograine, this was the first time Sidon and Turayan had seen each other since Duque's return. Although Turayan was more of a listener and a doer, he asked almost as soon as he saw Duque, "How are Theon and Gavin Rad?" "Not bad. At least those 2 can practice with each other, and then they can discuss the holy light with the Virgin Saintess." The Virgin Saintess? Does she sound like a beauty? Sidon whistled a little frivolously. Duque had a strange expression on his face. If you ignore her height of more than 60 feet and her stone-like skin, as a titan, she is indeed a beauty. Sidon did not know much about Karazhan and was momentarily embarrassed. However, he who was a bit more lively and jumpy immediately laughed. "Then I really want to see who among us exceptional talents is stronger. It's a pity about Uther." Turalian suddenly sighed. Among the first and second generation Holy Knights, other than Uther, there was no other leader who could suppress the other Holy Knights. Logically speaking, the remaining 6 first-generation Holy Knights were all qualified. Unfortunately, Reginald and Gavin Rad were Duque's loyal subjects, Bolvar was loyal to Stormwind and not the Church of Holy Light itself, Turalian was more of a commander than a spiritual leader, Sidon was more of a hero, and Theon had been silent for 13 years and had yet to return. As the leader of the second generation of Holy Knights, Alexandros Mograine did not have enough experience. Therefore, in the post-Uther era, the Silver Hand was more like a cooperative organization. Fortunately, under the pressure of the common enemy of the living like the Scourge army, the Holy Knights were still closely united. After entering Stratholme, in the temporarily commandeered command center in the city center, Mograine was the first to voice his concerns. The Scourge army's actions are too unusual. Turalyon nodded. I also feel that it's too quiet. Although there is not enough information to support it, it gives me a bad feeling. I feel that Arthas is plotting something bigger. Duque sighed. Arthas once took over the Sunwell, but let go of this incomparably precious source of mana in our eyes. He only revived another great lich, Kel, Thuzad, and then left. Don't you think this can explain one thing? The answer was already obvious. They don't care about the Sunwell because they have a better goal, which is the new Well of Eternity that is closer to the original. What? The three Holy Knights asked in unison. Arriving in front of an empty table, Duque raised his hand, and a dozen hands of magic cleared away all the junk on the table. He then spread out a map of Azeroth that he had drawn from memory on the table. Of course, there were only 3 continents: the Eastern Kingdom, the Northrend, and the Kalimdor continent. The places that were not widely known at this stage had been fooled by Duque by pretending that they did not exist. This is... The breathing of the generals quickened. The drawing of every map was a huge amount of work. Moreover, it could be misled by old maps, the weather, and all kinds of magical accidents that caused the drawing of the map to be very inaccurate. No one knew the importance of an accurate map better than these generals who had been leading troops all year round. Now, this big map that Duque had made based on his memory in the game was 4 meters by 4 meters in size. Although the making of the map was very characteristic of the game, in this era, even the military maps only had rough black lines. Compared to Duque's map, which had specific places, regional boundaries, and major monsters, it was simply a national treasure. This was not a joke. If it wasn't for the fact that the Alliance had been fighting as a whole for the last 10 years, the specific topographic maps of each country would still be hidden in the military headquarters of each country. Duque pointed to the place in his memory on the map. I don't know what the Scourge army is going to do. But if those bones want to go to the Well of Eternity, then they have to at least find a way to cross the endless sea to reach Azhara, then break through the powerful Night Elves' defense circle, and finally reach Mount Hyjal. The World Tree, Nordrassil. Thinking of the most powerful World Tree of this era, Duque couldn't help but feel a little dazed. All right, the stage and script were ready. When would the actors come on stage? At this moment, in the Dalajan city, Arthas walked in the ruins of the city. The dark clouds that had accumulated in the sky above the city turned it into a cold, eternal night. It felt good to be back in the cold. The elven kingdom of Eversummer was filled with the fragrance of flowers and vitality, making him feel uncomfortable. It always reminded him of the Lordaeron Palace garden that he used to play with Jaina when he was young, and of the goldfish in Barnell's farm. Now he liked this place even more. The ruins played out decadence, death, and despair. The cold wind cleansed him, and the cold suppressed those memories. The emotions brought by the memories no longer had any benefits to him. It only brought weakness, and in Arthas Menethil's heart, there was no room for weakness. Suddenly, Kel, Thuzad came. He bowed with his bony body. Everything is ready. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.